Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second COP31 Dialogues, which we are very pleased to organize together with E3G. My name is Dijan Balkaroğlu, and I am the COP31 Project Coordinator at IPC, and I'll be guiding us through the opening of today's program. So, looking around the room, it is really encouraging to see such a diverse group from policy, academia, civil society, and of course, from the Directorate of Climate Change. And I think this mix is exactly what today's conversation is about. So, as we are now just a few months away from COP31 in November, the focus is no longer only on setting targets, but on turning them into action. Turkey, together with Australia, will also play an important role in carrying these discussions forward in the lead up to COP31. And today's discussions are really centered around advancing implementation, empowering climate action, and energy transition. Our first panel, Driving Implementation from Belém'den Antalya'ya, will focus on how COP31 can help accelerate implementation through the action agenda and new institutional and financial mechanisms. And as this will likely be one of the first open discussions on this topic, we hope it can contribute to a clearer understanding of how the Turkish presidency can help advance the implementation agenda in the lead up to COP31. And in the second session, we will turn to the transition away from fossil fuels with a particular focus on clean power systems, electrification, grids, and the policy and investments needs surrounding this agenda. And we will begin with the keynote, followed by a short coffee break, before moving into our first panel discussion. And after the first session, we will break for lunch and continue in the afternoon with our second panel. And before inviting our keynote speaker, I would first like to invite Ümit Şahin, Head of Climate Change Studies at IPC, for his opening remarks. Ümit Bey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dijan, and welcome everyone. Good morning. I just like to say a few words. First of all, I'd like to thank to E3G for this joint organization. This is a part of our COP31 preparatory events. As you know, we started in January, mostly with webinars and some physical meetings like this. But this is our first in-person international meeting in the lead up to COP31. And I think this is a very important step because we really want to facilitate the dialogue between the presidency and the international climate community on very important topics of COP31, because we really want Turkish presidency be successful on COP31 with a very positive and constructive COP outcome. As you know, we are in a very sensitive moment geopolitically, and also I just came back from Santa Marta from the first fossil fuel phase out conference, so it was a really important turning point. So we will all talk about this today. I think this COP31 will also be a turning point for the climate negotiations. So we really need to keep up for a more ambitious international climate politics. So this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to enhance the dialogue between different parties, including the civil society, because the role of international civil society is very important in all the COPs, as you know. So COP31 is not different. So I thank you again for your participation, and I really thank E3G for this very good collaboration, and I hope you have a good event today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ümit Bey. So To open the day, we are very pleased to have with us Matthew Webb, Associate Director for Global Clean Power Diplomacy at E3G, who will deliver our keynote speech on climate diplomacy and international cooperation. Matt brings extensive experience in international climate diplomacy and global clean energy transition initiatives. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hope that's coming through okay on the microphone. So firstly, thank you very much, Ümit, or should I say teşekkürler, and it's great pleasure to be here this morning. This is my first visit to Istanbul, and my colleague Öykü has been very helpfully showing me around, but also teaching me a small amount of Turkish. So wonderful to be here, and it's a great pleasure to be able to just set a few opening remarks today. Thank you very much. As Ümit mentioned, I'm the Associate Director for Clean Power Diplomacy at E3G, but I also have had quite a lot of involvement with sort of COP process over the last few years. So I came to Istanbul and some meetings yesterday in Ankara, proudly wearing my Glasgow COP26 badge as well as my E3G badge. So it's really nice to be able to speak a little bit about some of the journey from over the last 5 years and then some of the implications going forward. Some of the things I wanted to cover today, what are some of the lessons we've learnt, not just from COP26, which was quite a big COP, but then some of the things that have rolled forward over the last few years in terms of legacies and ways of doing COPs. What are we facing right now? The opportunities and challenges of this year, the context following Belém'den, and then some of the implications. It's being very polite, very diplomatic. It is obviously for the Turkish and Australian governments to take forward their agenda and to lead, but hopefully they will be welcome for some reflections and some perspectives as they enter what is a very busy and frenetic period of diplomacy. I hope this short address provides a few prompts for a more detailed conversation through the panels today. I can't help but start with a couple of quotes. It's quite funny, the number of times I've heard people say over the last few days, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think that's something we're going to return to repeatedly. I believe it was actually a Churchill comment, which made me think of a perhaps more pertinent one, which was events, dear boy, events. When another British Prime Minister was asked what throws states and governments off track, or perhaps throws them on track, it's events. And I think one of the themes for the last 6 weeks has been we didn't expect to be in the position we're in with the crisis and the fossil fuel-driven energy crisis. And what is it that we can do with that over the next 6 months is hopefully going to be a recurring theme. What I'm going to say today is very much a mixture of some of my work at E3G, but also some very personal reflections from my time in the UK government. So if I was still a civil servant, I'd say this isn't government policy I'm talking about, and I'm saying this is a sort of mixture of some of my reflections and some of the work that E3G has done. Again, as President Kennedy said, good judgment is usually the result of experience, and experience is frequently the result of bad judgment. So what I'm going to say is probably experience based on, I hope it's not all been bad judgment, but hopefully the experience is helpful. Just to say a few words, individually I spent 20 years at the UK government, so I was always working on international energy and climate change. I actually worked, for the UK back through the Copenhagen COP, and then in particular worked with the presidency team for Glasgow. Through that process, I worked several times with one of the founders from E3G, who was the first special envoy for climate change in the UK. So that's the position that Rachel Kite now holds. So My sort of journey with E3G has been quite long as well through the the work in the UK government. For those that don't know E3G so well, we are a not-for-profit climate think tank, but we do specialise in diplomacy between governments on geopolitics, finance, energy, governance, resilience, adaptation. So we are a pure climate change mission think tank, but we do our work through diplomacy and through the channels of diplomacy. Obviously, every year we place huge store and huge stock in the Paris Agreement as the central multilateral agreement that we have achieved to take us to a safe climate, and we have to show that that's working, that the Paris Agreement is driving implementation. And every year we offer huge support to the COP presidencies, not just in convening with them and providing hopefully a really critical bridge to civil society, but also through events around London Climate Action Week, which will be coming up in mid-June, late June, and provides a really good opportunity to discuss the emerging priorities of a presidency and also think how that's going to be taken forward through the year. So we're very proud to be a key organiser of the London Climate Action Week events. So for the first part of the talk is going to be 3 bits. These are just a few reflections. I thought you'd rather look at some pictures than just look at words. So this is just some reflections from the 2019, 2020, 21. It was a long COP. Glasgow came a year later than people expected. So some of the team, it was a much longer period to work stuff through. As you may remember, it was the first time that we revisited the NDCs from the Paris Agreement. So it was the first time, we actually had, didn't have the global stock take at that point because that didn't kick in till afterwards. But it was the first time we sort of stared down, the next generation of NDCs and looked at the mitigation gap. And, we were facing, 30 gigatons of mitigation gap for 2030. Huge gap. So you're like, well, how do you deal with that? And my specialism's always been in the energy sector, and the transformation of the power sector was probably about 15 gigatons of that mitigation gap. So huge sector to deal with. And I guess one of the things about the presidency approach, I remember very well, is we tested and took a sort of sectoral approach to go, what are the biggest pieces we need to tackle? So power came up very high. Road transport and vehicles came up very high, and obviously, land use and forestry was a key thing, and then the finance piece. So, as many of you remember, that equated quite neatly to the catchphrase of coal cars, cash, and I've forgotten the last one, trees. So, a very, very simple sort of slogan. I guess looking at this, there were some particular elements of the COP26 presidency. We had a longer period of time, but we also had the ability in the year to work with leaders more than once, and I think that's an interesting reflection this year. We had one of those strange years where we had the G7 presidency preceding the COP, so there was a chance to do a lot of preparatory work. So these are the G7 leaders gathering on a beach in Cornwall, looking quite chilly, even though it's the summer. But there was a definite sense that was a gathering point to set the agenda in the margins of that G7. And I've got Boris Johnson in the middle here. Many people think many things of Boris Johnson, but from that point, from the G7, there was Prime Minister to President engagement on a weekly basis on that agenda of coal, cars, cash and trees. Very simple slogan, but it was engagement. It was engagement at the highest level. It was engagement at the leader level for a 3-month period ahead of the COP. And that was the sort of thing that made the difference, made the impact. One of the strands that we worked on, and the reason I've got Xi Jinping here, it was one of the big things with the diplomacy of the year and that 3-month period was actually bringing an end to international coal finance. So there was cascade diplomacy through working with South Korea and Japan at that G7 meeting, which then actually also brought a very significant announcement by Xi Jinping in September. in the margins of the UNGA. So there was a sense that we had a very simple set of slogans we could bring up to leaders. There were 2 leader events in the year, and I do wonder a little bit about what the potential is to have those side discussions around the NATO summit this summer. It may not be formally on the agenda, but if you can bring leaders together and start to set that agenda, work through to the Leaders Summit, which I believe is going to be in Istanbul ahead of the Ankara, ahead of the COP, at the start of the COP. So that bringing this up to the leader level and the engagement level is a very critical thing that I think happened at the COP, taking a sector approach, looking where the biggest emission reductions are going to come from. And then I guess one other aspect which was quite characteristic of the work on energy transition, we had done a lot of work thinking about things like phasing out coal within Europe and the OECD, but it was evident that we were going to have to extend that work to be more global in reach as a COP presidency. So being a COP presidency, yes, you can take what is a national strength, and for the UK we had done a very rapid move away from coal over the decade from 2010 to 2020, had a target to phase out by 2024. But how is that going to work globally? So one of the things we were very keen on doing was thinking about what is the transition element, what is the financial support, what is the technical support that's needed for the transition for major coal economies. So if you move it up from setting phase out, removing finance for coal, technical support for countries, and then financial support, that's where we had these ideas for several years of what could we do with countries like South Africa and India. So the picture on the top right is actually 2022, which is why there's Rishi Sunak there. But it represents the JETP in South Africa, which was the fruits of that conversation where you went, actually, we can't just phase out coal from all global economies. We have to have these transition and finance arrangements. And it was a deliberate piece of the presidency planning and our work to try and create some of those structures. Now, we didn't know that that was going to be called a JETP at that point in time. And we didn't, at that point in time, know how many JETPs there would be, or how well they would succeed. But it was, again, it was a deliberate strategy to go as, how can you extend that global momentum away from fossil fuels? And of course, all the work of that campaigning on coal and the engagement with emerging economies, we had an Energy Transition Council, created that sense of momentum in the first week. These campaigns then led to significant moments in the first week, which created the political space to have an ambitious declaration in the second week. And obviously, one of my strongest memories was sitting there watching that very famous moment where the debate around coal phase out or phase down took place late on the Saturday night at the end of the second week, which is that moment with Peter Hill sitting looking on, reminding us of the COVID times that we were in. But it all comes together. So there was it was quite a long period of diplomacy. We had leader-level diplomacy. We had very resonant catchphrases that you could use to, leaders need focus. They need quite simple, approaches. And that sense of not just taking a UK priority, but taking something and building into something that works globally were some of the themes that really, I certainly recall from my time working in the presidency. So this is not 2021. I'm glad we're well clear of COVID. Things are different. This year is not a 5-year COP year. This is not a GST year. It's not an NDC implementation year. This an NDC submitting year. This is a year about rolling up sleeves. So I think the early signs from the Turkish Australian presidency to focus on implementation are absolutely right. We have to be putting everything in place that we possibly can to enable countries to perform to and exceed the ambition of the NDCs they've submitted. So I think that is absolutely right this year. Obviously, this is a normal COP year, and the Australian and Turkish governments have the normal amount of time to prepare, which is very, very small, 6-month period to pick up the agenda, push forward and try and, pick up all the machinery, all the negotiation tracks and move them forward successfully. And right now, multilateral consensus is not what it was. I deliberately put that G7 picture up there. We do not have those vehicles. We do not have a US driving climate ambition or climate finance. We do not have mechanisms in quite the same way that we can set consensus. And dare I say it also that, this is a deliberate choice, we don't have quite the same, dare I say it, donor-recipient relationship between the North and South, which characterised the way in which the JETPs were set up. The world is different now. The technology is cheaper, it's being deployed faster, particularly in Asia. The current crisis is more global. And I think one of the things that we need to look at being different now is these much more win-win transactional investment and trade partnerships that we need to set up. Now, it's not to say that things like the JETPs were the wrong idea. They were trying to set very, very high ambition bars for transformation over a 15-year period. But we need very urgently to reframe them and also recognise that what's working in our favour right now in terms of cost, low cost, and the capacity to build and deploy the clean technology is vastly superior to what it was in 2020. It's a huge opportunity, but we need to reconfigure the politics and the partnerships. How do I click next? Is it the... there we go, let's try one of these. Oh, other way. That's it. There we go. So, coming on to where we are now. That was kind of the reason I put Mark Carney up there. It looks a little lonely up on the left. That idea of new configurations, his middle powers thing. If I'd have put the current British Prime Minister up there, I would have said coalitions of the willing. We need to find new partnerships. We need to find coalitions whilst we deal with this, the big power play that is taking place. What the US is doing in the world, the role of China in the world. Countries caught between that, whether they want to be called middle powers or not. I'm not really sure the UK would like to be called a middle power. Perhaps an upper middle power, I don't know. But we have to have new configurations, new partnerships. And I know that's something that the IPC has been thinking about a lot in terms of dialogues amongst those countries. We have, unexpectedly, we have perhaps the biggest single driver, and I'm taking Fatih Birol's quote here. The IEA is currently saying that this crisis will be bigger than the combined impact of 1973 and the Ukraine crisis put together. So we have, for the second time in 5 years, the biggest possible driver caused by fossil fuel volatility and the effect of our dependence on fossils in our entire economy, not just in Europe about gas supplies, but globally, is at the top table for debate and discussion. It's going to be affecting the prosperity, affordability, and economic outcomes of the majority of countries in the world. So this is going to be top table. So what is it that we can do this year to pick up that resonance and make particularly the COP this year a solution to the two crises that we face, not just the one. Now, it's very easy for commentators to say this, but the actual doing of this through diplomacy is what is going to be the challenge over the next 6 months. Clean energy deployment and diversification of those supply chains is going to be the quickest move away from our fossil fuel vulnerability, and it is going to be the quickest way to solve the climate crisis. So how are we going to do that in our diplomacy? How can the COP presidency take that tailwind and work with it? And, the bottom line here, are 3 reasons to be cheerful. I'm a cheerful person. The sun's shining. I'm in Istanbul for the first time, so it is a good morning. We have just seen this record beautiful chart from Ember. We have just seen renewable generation overtake coal last year. And the other chart I could have put there was the first time in history coal power emissions from China and India simultaneously reduced last year. This is a structural change away from coal. I've worked on coal since 2003. This is a long time coming. We should have been here 10 years ago. So how do we turn that tip into a cascade? We have to retire the coal probably 8 to 10 times faster. You will know these figures, but if we burn through the lifetime of the existing coal plant, we will take out 2/3 of the remaining carbon budget at 1.5 degrees. We cannot do that. So what is it we're going to do with these tailwind politics to actually drive the coal off the system? Part of the reason that 80% of renewable investment is limited to China, the EU and the US, is that a lot of the other major developing economies have over-invested in coal. So we have to have mechanisms to make renewables the first paid generation source on those systems and accelerate retirement of that coal. But that is a real challenge. So, but we're at a critical pivot. And the other two pieces, I think, are really key to the debate this year. So if we're going to have an argument about energy security and how that solves the climate, responding to that solves the climate crisis as well, or takes us to the pathway we need, I think these two charts at the bottom are probably two of the main ingredients. This is the IEA Global Energy Review this year. Electrification and electricity demand is growing at twice the speed of energy demand. We are seeing a take-off moment for the electrification of our economies. We have to invest, plan and prepare so that we match supply-side growth with demand-side use. And that's where, I just noticed yesterday, I think the German government announced 5 billion euros for green industrialization incentives. This is now going beyond, solar panels and electric cars. This is going into the electrification of the economy. So what is it that we can do to open up that electrification agenda and make it relevant not just for Northern Europe, relevant for Turkey, bridge to Asia, relevant for Africa? I mean, clean cooking, energy access, and then growth and green industrialization are all agendas we've got to open up. And I think that left-hand middle chart there is going to have to link hand in hand with the right-hand chart, which is this progress, which we'll hear a lot more about in terms of plotting pathways to reduce and then end our dependency on fossil fuel. It is no good us splitting off into one faction that wants to talk about fossil fuels and one faction that wants to... This has to be implementation of a coherent package, for a single energy system. But I think there is the potential, and I'm looking forward to... My colleagues were in St. Martin. I had massive FOMO last week. My colleagues were there. I am looking to understand how we can take that momentum, that space that Santa Marta created, but also use it over the next couple of years to build momentum back into the Paris Agreement, back into the next ambition-setting moment in 2028. I think it's tremendously exciting. So I'm going to come to the end of my talk. I've no idea how long I've talked for, but nobody's made any bad hand gestures yet. Here are some implications to leave you with, and I think we are sharing these sort of in sort of good faith for discussion and some triggers for the day to day, and also at a very critical point for the COP31 president. How do you say it, Cosima? Do we say presidents? We do. Presidency, yes. We all come into terms with innovative and new models of presidency this year. I think these are some points to think about today. This piece about the imperative, how can we engage leaders? And also, how are people going to respond to COP? I mean, I yesterday had the first notification from my energy supplier that my bill's going up 20%. It won't be the last. I suspect I'll have 3 or 4 of those by the time I get to November. How are the public going to see 75,000 people going to a climate change conference as being relevant to helping bring down their energy bill? Because that's what the politicians are going to be asking. So economic, energy security and affordability. If we can't answer that question and show that COP is part of the solution, the driving and clean energy technology is part of the solution, we will not have succeeded in our diplomacy. And we'll not have succeeded in making people understand that the Paris Agreement framework is the thing that's going to take us to a more secure energy system and a more secure climate. I think I didn't dwell on it here. I mean, Glasgow, all that sector action, their campaigns, a lot of architecture has been created. And I think, I very, very much applaud the efforts that the Brazilian presidency took last year to stabilise, coordinate, and sort of take that action agenda and fit it back against GST delivery. I think it was a very clever step, actually. And I hope that the incoming presidencies are then able to not rearrange or need to work with all that agenda, but do, take those pieces and challenge those action initiatives and say, what are you delivering? Are you delivering real financial flows to real projects and real technical support in the next year, 18 months? that should be, I hope, a really strong, and the presidency should be quite demanding in that space. We are past the age of making commitments. We are into the age of delivering finance and mobilising and technical support. So I hope that the presidency is quite challenging to the action agenda and also groups things together into impactful, forward-moving, initiatives that they can also put their own stamp on as the presidency. We've touched on this. This search for more, I've called them more equitable win-win partnerships. This is what we need. We have got to move into the trade, investment and new partnership space. And that will help with the global north, global south politics, which are often very difficult at the COP. The COPs are big now, but I would strongly hope that the presidency is able not only to steward the formal negotiations, which I think is, I understand to be more the role of the Australian team, but also, take those, what I've called bridging dialogues. We are in a bridging location here. There are subjects, the Baku to Belém roadmap, forestry, fossil fuels. There are subjects which we need to sustain the dialogue on. It is not easy to do them in the formal negotiations, but it is in the gift of the COP presidency to make space, make room, and maybe not resolve those this year, but carry them forward and go, these need to be part of our future ambition setting GST2 framework. So I hope there is and I've put the finance, fossils and forestry here potentially, but there are a number of areas where we need to keep making progress, and it's probably going to be hard to do them inside the formal negotiations. And I guess that's that bit in the penultimate bullet. This is a year of implementation, helping countries get the job done on their NDCs, exceed their ambition, but we also need to keep an eye on how those very partnerships and real economy actions can start to set the frame for that future ambition framework as part of the whole Paris ratchet, which needs to keep moving forward. And then finally, in the UK, we took a decision to end our international financing for fossil fuels a year before the Glasgow COP. And then we created a very big partnership, which, amongst other things, led to a declaration and also I would say in response there was also a push by the Danes to set up the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance as well in that similar sort of space. There is an expectation that COP presidencies will show leadership at home and link that leadership at home to greater action abroad. And as I understand, there is the potential for Turkey to lay out more ambition around its renewables deployment. And I would strongly encourage that to talk about how you're going to connect that renewables, new grid investment, the financing models, but critically indicate how that is going to move this country away from coal power and plans for new coal power, which are going to be, are already, I would argue, unnecessary and can be linked to a plan for the electrification and the electrification agenda globally, but also linked to a plan for the transition away from fossil fuels. So there's a huge opportunity for particularly Turkey and Australia, to take their domestic plans and show how they are resonant and help drive momentum globally on those topics. So I'm going to leave it there. I have no idea how long I've talked for, but nobody has pulled a face. So I'm only going to say, Teşekkürler, thank you, and a great pleasure to be here.
Now we'll have a short coffee break around 3 minutes, and we'll be back with our first panel. Once everyone is settled, we shall begin. So we'll continue with our first panel discussion, driving implementation from Belém'den Antalya'ya. Just a quick note as well, Tuğba Dinçbaş from the Directorate of Climate Change will be joining us online for the session. And with that, I would like to invite our moderator, Ümit Şahin from IPC, along with our panelists, Cosima Cassel from E3G and Nuri Özbağdatlı from UNDP, to the floor. Thank you.
Çalışıyor herhalde değil mi? Tamam. Çok teşekkürler. So welcome to the first panel. Very excited about this very interesting discussion today. And first of all, thank to all our participants in the panel. So this panel will be about the main theme of COP31 actually. COP31, as you know, will be about implementation. And in the implementation, especially after COP30, as Matt already said in his keynote speech, that with the Brazilian presidency, the importance of action agenda in the implementation of climate action and also delivering GST became more important, and now Turkish presidency is trying to put it on the top of the agenda for this COP, and will today in this panel we try to understand one of the most important parts of this action agenda. But before coming to the action agenda, we'll start with a little bit of the geopolitical context of this discussion. And first, of course, I need to introduce our panelists today. Today we have Cosima Cassel from E3G. She is the program lead of climate diplomacy and geopolitics. So welcome, Cosima. And Nuri Özbağdatlı from UNDP Europe and Central Asia office. He is the climate change specialist at UNDP and is very long time activist plus expert on climate change issues. So he's also going to talk about what they do on action agenda. And we are also very pleased to welcome today Tuğba Dinçbaş, Deputy Climate Change Director from Ankara. She's one of the most busy team members of COP presidency this year, and she's going to talk about more on climate, the action agenda items. So I want to start with Cosima for a little bit of geopolitical context. So as all we know, the COP31 comes at a time when the climate regime is shifting from more from the rule setting to implementation, as we all know. And we all want a successful COP31 outcome. So what does success look like for COP31 in making that shift really possible and tangible? And what is your expectations about Turkey in its presidency role?
Thanks so much. Can you hear me through this mic?
Yeah.
I don't need that one. Okay, fantastic. Merhaba, günaydın ve teşekkürler for the invite. That's the limit of my Turkish, but thanks to Duolingo, what I can say so far. It's really great to be here in Istanbul again, like Matt, for the first time in this amazing city, and great to be here. And thanks so much for having us to talk about COP31 at this really pivotal time. We're at a pivotal inflection point, really, for the UNFCCC system and COPs in general, and so a really important year for Turkey to have the presidency. I want to talk a little bit about two kind of structural shifts happening, which means that this year is so important. Firstly, as you mentioned, the geopolitics, which my colleague Matt laid out some of the changes that we're experiencing currently in the wider context of where we are in 2026. The context has fundamentally changed in terms of how countries engage with each other. We're living in a much more contested, transactional world where there is a kind of major power competition also between the US and China. There's like the rise of middle powers, more assertive powers, and it's a much more complex system, and there's also kind of a reduction of trust also in the multilateral system and the processes that have kind of governed a lot of how the world interacts over the past years. We're seeing a lot of governments in crisis mode with a number of wars around the world, limited bandwidth really to engage in the longer term thinking as just fighting kind of the current crises of the moment. This is putting governments and putting the multilateral system under huge pressure. We're seeing, obviously, the energy crisis, as Matt mentioned, is having global repercussions. And this is putting energy security right at the center of domestic politics as well as global politics. At the same time, the transition is accelerating, right? As Matt laid out, the costs of clean energy are reducing rapidly. The amount of investment flowing into clean energy is increasing, and we are on this tipping point into kind of a reduction in emissions. But we need to accelerate that so that emissions fall much quicker. But countries are seeing that there's opportunities for growth. The markets are really driving the transition in many places. But this transition isn't equal across regions, across populations. Also, adaptation is still, we're still far from where we need to be in resourcing and supporting the most vulnerable to adapt to climate change. So even though this underlying transition is gaining momentum, the politics are getting harder. And COP31 must navigate this fragile multilateral context and also capitalize on the opportunities that are available to accelerate that transition and support everyone and especially the most vulnerable. The second shift I want to talk about is within the climate regime. As you mentioned, we're moving from a time of rule setting to delivery. And even without this kind of changing geopolitical context, we would be in a moment of evolution for the climate system. After 11 years, the Paris Rulebook, 11 years since the Paris Agreement was signed, the Paris Rulebook is complete, and we have clear direction on the objectives that we need to achieve that were set out in the first global stocktake. So now we need to deliver them. And the COP process as it stands is not designed for that. It's designed for the negotiations. And it needs to evolve into a system of kind of support for delivery, for accountability. It needs to evolve also to, kind of support other forms of cooperation. As Matt laid out, colleagues and many of you, I think, were in Santa Marta also last week, showing that countries are working now in coalitions, not necessarily kind of via the consensus within the UNFCCC system. We need to have that support also for those coalitions. We also need to be kind of engaging much closer with real world action, because that's where the action is taking place a lot of the time. And the role of the action agenda here is essential, because this is the delivery arm of the Paris Agreement. So what does success look like in 2026 at COP31, and what is Turkey's role in that? So I think there's kind of three main elements of that. The first is, we need to restore this confidence that the multilateral climate system can deliver. And this means taking steps forward in the evolution along the lines I was talking about. This means showing that the action agenda can be this operational bridge between the negotiations, everything that has been agreed, the objectives that we set ourselves, and what's happening in the real world. And it needs to kind of elevate what's happening in the real world and put that center stage, build coherence within that kind of wider ecosystem of everything that's happening and linking it back to those goals that we have agreed. The second thing is to kind of demonstrate that delivery is underway and that tangible progress is being made in a number of thematic areas. I'm going to touch on a few here. The first is finance. Finance is really at the center of everything. We've seen, last year the Baku to Belém roadmap was agreed. Unfortunately, it wasn't kind of wholeheartedly picked up at COP30. But this means Turkey has a key role in making sure that the vision that was laid out in the Baku-Belém roadmap of mobilizing 1.3 trillion stays at the center of the work and the kind of recommendations laid out are carried forward. And this means linking that into the action agenda, into the activation groups, and also engaging with other institutions such as the multilateral development banks with that frame in mind. Adaptation, second, major priority. I think this is, part of this is the finance. We had this agreement last year to triple adaptation finance, but how is that actually showing up in practice? And what solutions are there in the real world to get that delivery of finance to adaptation? With Turkey's priority around resilient cities, this is also an opportunity to kind of demonstrate scalable solutions, linking them also back to national adaptation plans and the Global Goal for Adaptation, making sure that there's that link across and really kind of highlighting all the great work that is being done and can knowledge share those examples as well. Related to this is the oceans and the Pacific and the role of those within this COP. I think we have a real opportunity with the Pacific Islands hosting the pre-COP and being part of the presidency this year. And there's a role for Turkey in elevating those Pacific voices and linking this to kind of the resilience and adaptation questions and showcasing the scalable solutions for those countries operating in the front line of climate change. Next is the clean energy transition. Matt's already spoken about the importance of this and how it's kind of, and we have a panel later which will go into more detail, so I won't spend too long on this, but it's, we do have, this situation now. I think countries are seeing, given the crisis, the energy crisis that we're currently experiencing, how central it is to accelerate the transition to clean energy, putting electrification front and center, making sure that there's, finance flowing and using that, political moment that we have to really highlight that, and linking it, of course, back to the transitioning away from fossil fuels roadmap that the Brazilians have taken forward this year, and making sure that that's linked across into the action agenda. Next is trade and industry, and it's great to see that green industrialization is a priority for the Turkish presidency. There is a lot of work to do in this area of bringing together the number of initiatives that exist within the green industrialization space to make it a more coherent ecosystem, that they kind of are working in tandem with each other, understanding, working towards aligned objectives as well. It's important to have a focus on standards this year, like standards for green cement, green steel. I don't expect by COP31 we'll have a global agreement on what those will be, but we need to make the progress to bring that alignment forward. Finally, on zero waste, I know this is a big priority for the Turkish presidency, and it's great to see a focus on methane within this. I'd highlight it's really important to have a package on methane, which covers both waste methane, but also methane from energy to really kind of make sure that we can have the most impact at reducing emissions. The third pillar, I would say, of the success of COP31, following the kind of delivery against those thematic areas, is the continuity that COP31 must show in delivering to the next milestone, which within the COP sphere, which is the second global stocktake, which is happening in 2028. So COP31 is not a kind of standalone moment operating in isolation. It needs to be the fundamental building block of success towards towards the GST2. So I think it's really important that Turkey uses this moment to kind of build a clear vision of forward, so that we can set up what we need to set up to have the most successful global stocktake in 2028. And this means working with past presidencies, but also future presidencies, engaging early with Ethiopia, and if we find out soon who the presidency following that will be, working closely with them as well, because continuity is going to be really critical to ensuring that we put the building blocks in place to deliver a very successful global stocktake, which shows that we are kind of getting on track to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Another thing which Turkey should be focusing on this year as well is around NDCs. So last year was the year that NDCs needed to be submitted. We're still missing around 60 of them. We need to keep the pressure on for all countries to deliver their NDCs, but also major emitters to, especially those with a range, to be aiming for the top of that range or even overshooting NDCs. We need to kind of be putting those building blocks in place now, not forgetting about NDCs until the next round in 2030, because this is a key building block towards success at the second GST. So just to end with three, I'd say, guiding principles for Turkey going through this year, and I think those are collaboration, consultation, and political elevation. So firstly, on collaboration, working really closely, as I mentioned, with different presidencies, past, present, and future, but not also engaging widely with parties and not just climate ministry to climate ministry. This needs to be engagement between finance ministries, trade ministries, industry ministries, these ministries which are kind of closer to where the implementation is taking place. And then secondly, collaborating with much wider selection of stakeholders, with the many initiatives that are existing in the climate space, making sure they're also engaging and consulting widely with civil society, with private sector, with others, to understand what their needs are, how they see the kind of blocks and how they see the progress going forward, and through that we can kind of get a clear pathway forward to success. And then thirdly, elevation, like political elevation. So as Matt was saying, the importance and the impact that you can have by engaging at the highest level, by making sure that priorities are voiced through different kind of key diplomatic moments, through the G20, through other fora, and also through climate weeks, which are key moments. There's a lot of different climate weeks happening throughout the year now, and these are really key moments where the whole of the climate, ecosystem kind of comes together and can report on progress. And I think making sure these moments are ones where there's showing alignment of how their action on the real world is contributing to climate action and to the goals of the GST, the first GST, and the axes which the Brazilian presidency structured their action agenda by will be absolutely critical, and Turkey can play a key role in making sure that is a focus. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Cosima. Now I like to turn to Nuri for more UNDP position for this, but also his personal views. So, as Cosima said, this action agenda is an important part of the discussion of implementation this year. So, how should we understand the action agenda and how to distinguish it from the implementation track? This is my first question to you. And then, how can civil society and think tanks and other observer organizations effectively engage with the action agenda, and what role do these activation groups of last year can do?
Maybe there are a few things, thank you, so you make my life easier. But maybe there are some key, let's say, points to keep always in mind. So, as Cosima put on the frame, this is a very dynamic system and an open system. When we talk about climate, it's not only energy, or it is not only water and adaptation of these issues. It's also related with all This is not because I am talking big things. I hope you hear me better with this. But UNFCCC process, please consider this is just one part of the whole system. And it is for really framing up, focusing up, and making a consensus among the parties. And it is an amazing job, because it is maybe one of the best example, having all the countries coming up with a consensus to move forward a big problem for solution. So I think we need to consider this. This is one of the most important things to keep UNFCCC process and Paris Agreement functional. And as also told, this whole dynamics within the bigger system, let's say, is pushing to the system for make it not functional. So as we know, countries are withdrawing from Paris Agreement or UNFCCC, or the current financial system is not really helpful for unlocking the finance, or we know how the capacity building issues is still going on with an inequality looking from the region to region. And here, UNFCCC process focusing on the negotiations has a distinct but alongside process to activate the non-state actors, to activate the solution makers and active players for climate action. So actually it is not a new thing. So Action Agenda started years ago, but it evolved through Paris Agreement process, through UNFCCC process, but also it evolved through the change in technology and everything. And now, after COP30, I think it is very important to acknowledge this. Action Agenda becomes kind of a more famous but also important area. And it is to link not only the negotiations but science with global stocktake. It is also linked the solutions from one scale to another. And it really gives a space for real life, let's say, discussions. And as you already said, when we are talking about climate, we need to always keep in mind what is going on in the real world. Because it is not only that kind of, secure areas that we can easily, as we have such a privilege thanks to IPM and UMIT, such a privilege having here to discuss such things. But in the real world, it is not the case. So I think it is very important to keep in mind while discussing the climate regime, negotiations and process, there is a reality beyond these buildings and negotiation, let's say, discussions. And this reality is not really a promising one or positive one. So COP presidencies has always this kind of, responsibility while moving forward the negotiation tracks and climate regime for Paris Agreement goals and based on the global stocktake, but also now, coming from the last COPs, has also a responsibility to provide a better space for non-state actors to engage, and making this space more functional and solution-oriented. So, coming from COP30 to COP31, we see that three pillars of COP31, or let's say motto of COP31, which is dialogue, consensus, and action, is really providing a nice, let's say, roadmap for finding our route where we are going from previous COPs to forward. And now the action agenda, I'm sure that Tuba will provide more information on that, create a focus to come up with some solutions coming from previous COPs at global level, but also those solutions and areas is also providing opportunity for local action, for national level engagements, for non-state actors to create a motivation and take action. And one of the key things maybe is really focusing on this action part, which means in different definitions, let's say, in different perspectives. So when you look at the, as we talk system level, there is a finance system, right? And when we look at the, let's say, policy, there is a policy system. Or in the real life, we have somehow limited with some, rules and some infrastructure within the city system. And it makes us to think about how we can really provide some solutions that can create a change on the ground, but also be helpful for signaling the global related solutions and problems. And I think it is important to provide information and platforms for non-state actors, especially civil society, think tank, private sector, public sector, to be more active. How you can get information, how you know about what is going on all these discussions. What would be your one action that can make an impact? And here there are some tools like UNFCCC's NASCA platform. There are some tools now, COP31 webpage, cop31.tr, to provide information and ask inputs for the action agenda. I don't know if you're aware, 11th of May was deadline. Still have some time to provide your inputs onto the action agenda. And also coming up with organizations that that can make a coalition. But always keep in mind that there is something already set and going on. So if you have some organizations that working on net zero, or if you have some organizations that working on adaptation, finance, so try to understand what is going on then and how I can provide meaningful input rather than creating something new. And for specifically UNDP, it means that we want to see change on the ground. And UNDP's comparative advantage here is that while we are working on 170 countries on the ground with NGOs, civil society, governments, private sector, but we also have the global team and global level to bridge the implementation with policy. So it is very important for us to transform these all discussions global level on policy level to local national level on action, from bridging the policy to delivery and bridging the global to national and local level. And I think we are also very privileged compared to the people who are dealing with climate before Paris Agreement, because we have NDCs. So it is very important that all countries are providing their plans, what to do, what they can do based on their national capacities, and plus they provide national adaptation plans. And Paris Agreement has this miracle on NDC, but within global stocktake and within reporting with the BTRs. So this three cycle is actually the essence of Paris Agreement. And based on all this, we can feel ourselves in a, let's say, more focused to understand what is the NDC is saying in a country, what is the report is saying in terms of the implementation based on the global stocktake at national level. And then as an, let's say, non-state actor, we can define, okay, we need to focus on this because of my country's needs, because of my local community's needs. And here there are some, let's say, gaps to bridge. So one of the questions is about, okay, if we have the NDCs, if we have the adaptation plans and everything, sectoral plans, then what does it mean for our country's development process? What does it mean for our engagement with the public, private, or other actors to take an action? and how I can read out an NDC for implementation. So that bridging part is, I think, very important for not only seeing the link between the climate and development, but activating all actors. And then, let's see, we have this kind of the better understanding of this policy level bridge to activity. Then we need to understand, okay, but what does it mean for the, let's say, organizations that provides inputs to that, including finance, including policy, including some kind of platforms. And it should be aggregated and standardized in a way to tell, okay, based on my priorities, I want to tap in that capacity. And think about the finance part, it is about projects and programs. And these should be not fragmented, but really talking about the need of the whole system with a better designed and integrated way. And it is a complicated one. That's why I think it is very important to focus on the coalitions and cooperations to come together, to discuss this together with the public and private part or state and non-state actors to design their course of actions. And then the finance part, I think, is very important because as we are always talking about the finance, but the problem is not only the lack of finance. The problem is the structure to tap in finance and then using this finance for addressing the systemic level issues. So if you have finance only for renewable energy or mitigation, it will not be enough for you to deal with the climate-related points as a system, because you need also finance for adaptation, and you need also finance for your SMEs. You need also finance for understanding how this change in the economy for climate will impact the youth skills and jobs. So it is very important to understand this and make this finance scheduled in that way. So coming up to the UNDP part, because we have been working on not only climate but on development part, sustainable development goals, we have the power of understanding the country needs based on the country offices and their very framed and clear work with the government and non-state actors. And then we can build on the NDC implementation based on their needs, country-tailored process, and talk with the all parties, including COP presidencies, NGOs, private sector, UN system, and try to facilitate these discussions and come up with some solutions. And critical part for us is not to create something new, a red tape, a bureaucracy, but really activating the system for more effective and efficient work. And we are very proud to work with COP31 presidency to design some critical part of the action agenda item. Maybe we can talk on that later. But here I would like to give a message that this whole action agenda thing is a different thing from negotiations, but it is becoming more important for changing the course. And you as individuals, but also your organizations, has a role, and you never underestimate that role to take action. And for taking action more concrete, more focused, more effective and efficient, it should be a better communication, coordination, and information sharing. And thanks for this event to provide this. But please be demanding, proactive, tap into the websites and everything, and find out what is going on and how you can provide your inputs to that. And we are very happy to be working with you on that. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Nuri. So now I turn to Tuğba Dinçbaş from COP31 presidency. So my first question, you can hear me, right? Yes, I hope.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. 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 So my first question is, what are your key action agenda priorities as the COP31 presidency? And could you elaborate on the process, including how last year's priorities relate to the six-axis framework introduced in Brazil? And how do you plan to develop these priorities? And how will you collaborate with parties and broader stakeholders, including civil society? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to be with you today, even though I had to join virtually. First of all, I would like to thank to Istanbul Policy Center for organizing this panel, for bringing us together for this valuable exchange. As the COP31 presidency, we are committed to responsible stewardship. We will defend the process and seek to reinforce its foundations. This means ensuring that countries fulfill the basic requirements of the COP, doing what they say they will do, and supporting each other and submitting their plans and being transparent. This real test is whether we will meet our essential legal obligations. The central question in international climate action today is no longer one of ambition. It is one of implementation, as Matthew and the other colleagues have. And successive presidencies have delivered many great outcomes through different initiatives in the last years. But there is now a clear need for formalizing this process and ensure COP-to-COP continuity. At COP30 last year, the high-level champions agreed 5-year plan for global climate action agenda and global stocktake. As the COP31 presidency, we want to institutionalize this process further. We want to double down on secretariat on the next steps. And we will make sure that we can hand it over to our Ethiopian successors, even more capable for delivering results. The Global Climate Action Agenda and the Global Implementation Accelerator, for example, place this structural challenge at the center of the international climate architecture. And they mark the beginning of new cycle in which commitments must before dialogue, consensus, and actions, and these are also covered like collaboration, consultation, and political elevation. And these principles shape every part of our work. And as the 31 president, spotlight of 9 of our thematic priorities aligned with global climate access. Action agenda, we try to link the 31, which is also very crucial, is implementation and private sector. Let me go through each of 9 themes briefly, very briefly. The waste sector is the 3rd largest source by 2050. So this area will be led of Zero Waste Foundation and our high-level champion, anchoring a globally recognized model that began in Turkey. And the second area is the oceans and seas. We are working with our Australian colleagues very closely in every area of the COP31 energy transition. And around more than 700 million people still lack access to electricity, and roughly 2 billion rely on polluting cooking fuels. So at COP31 we will translate the COP28 commitments. These are the tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency into delivery on the ground, with a particular focus on clean cooking, which we are working with the International Energy Agency, and also electrification and grids. I can say that electrification in industry, buildings, transportation and manufacturing, and the necessary infrastructure, grid infrastructure, for example, are among the most important topics on the COP31 action agenda. And the last area is Rio Convention synergies. 2026 is a unique year of the three Rio Conventions. Climate, biodiversity and desertification will take place in the same calendar year. So at COP31 we will use this convergence to advance integrated approaches to, for example, wildfire risk governance, carbon sink protection and water management, particularly in climate hotspots, including Mediterranean, the Pacific and Africa. We will work with the secretaries of the three conventions and regional partners very closely. And of course, you will be questioning the finance capacity and technology issues, how to position these functions as cross-cutting enablers across all priority areas. And each team is supported by a structured methodology and strong institutional coordination, ensuring coherence and effectiveness. And of course, climate change is a very cross-cutting area, and there are many other issues that we have to touch. So for this, we are working with Global Climate Action Agenda, with the accesses and the activation groups, and we are having many meetings with them, so we will be supporting the process within this structure. To sum up, our approach is grounded in complementarity. We do not duplicate efforts, we support and connect. And the action agenda is open, as Nuri said, for feedbacks to the global community. And we go carefully through the inputs that we receive. And lastly, the action agenda will be officially launched in 9th of June during the SP sessions, the first week, with key milestones guiding us towards COP31. And now I will stop here and then we will continue the next. Thanks.
Thank you, Tuğba Hanım. It's really good to hear the action agenda in general. Now I'd like to start the second tour again with Tuğba Hanım, because now I'd like to pass through a specific action agenda item, which is, you already told us something you propose to the action agenda, which is a new mechanism to power the implementation with better aligning better the financial instruments and institutional structure. So could you... Tuğba Hanım burada değil mi? Kayboldu. Tuğba Hanım duyuyorsunuz değil mi?
Yes,
Ha. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see you. That's why I puzzled. Could you tell us a little bit more about this new mechanism that you propose? How will this mechanism support implementation in practice, and what distinguishes it from previous implementation-oriented initiatives?
Yes, thanks. Actually, we called it mechanism, but we didn't name it. Perhaps we will change the name, because it's not a part of coordination, it's a type of coalition system. So, regarding the powering climate action, the implementation challenge can be understood through three interconnected gaps. First, there is a clear pipeline gap, project pipeline gap, as countries have strong analytical investment-ready and bankable projects. Second, there is a coordination and capacity gap, where climate priorities are not always fully aligned with national development agendas, and institutional fragmentation slows down decision-making and delivery. And as one of our panelists say that collaboration with other ministries like finance, energy, and etc. are also very important at the national level. And third, there is a finance and risk perception gap, where global capital exists in significant volumes, but it is not effectively flowing into developing and emerging markets due to a lack of well-prepared, scalable, and de-risked investment opportunities. So, underlying these challenges, there is also a critical cross-cutting issue. In many countries, decision-making is not sufficiently supported by integrated data, modeling, and institutional capacity, and limiting the ability to identify priorities, design implementable actions, and sustain delivery. So, we can move to the next slide. It is important to underline that there are already many actors working in this space, including UNDP Climate Performance, the NDC Partnership, the UNEP, etc., and also the multilateral development banks, all of which play critical roles. Therefore, our intention is not to create a new parallel structure, but rather to enhance the effectiveness of what already exists, and plus bringing private sector finance to this process. What we are proposing is not a traditional mechanism in the bureaucratic sense, but rather a practical, action-oriented coalition that accelerates implementation by strengthening coordination, aligning efforts, and delivering tangible results, actually. And we can move to the next slide. Yes, thanks. The core objective is straightforward. To bridge the gap between national climate commitments and real investment on the ground. And to achieve this, we aim to simultaneously strengthen policy alignment, project development, and access to finance, ensuring that these three elements work together in a very coherent and mutually reinforcing way, supporting by strengthening national analytical capacity and institutional systems. And first, we focus on strategic alignment and prioritization, where national climate targets, development plans, and sectoral strategies like on energy or industry are brought together to identify the highest impact priority areas, allowing countries to focus their efforts where they can deliver the greatest results rather than trying to address everything at once, while strengthening national capacity through integrated modeling, data systems, and institutional coordination, as I said before. Second, we will try to support actually the coalition, the system. We will support project development and pipeline creation, where these priorities are translated into concrete investment-ready programs and projects, while also strengthening national capacity and ensuring strong country ownership, which is essential for long-term success. And as I said, there are also many effective organizations like GCF, NDCP, etc., and we will be supporting these organizations by this project, effective project development cycles. Third, we work on finance design and investment mobilization, where projects are structured in a way that makes them more attractive to investors, especially private sector, through appropriate financial instruments, risk-sharing mechanisms, and de-risking approaches that are helping to unlock both public and private capital at scale. What distinguished actually this initiative is its strong focus on practicality and delivery. Importantly, this approach does not treat modeling, capacity building, and implementation as separate steps, but brings them together as part of one continuous process that supports decision-making and delivery. Rather than presenting another broad conceptual framework, we are prioritizing tangible results through a focused approach starting with a limited number of pilot countries and selected priority sectors, such as electrification or industrial decarbonization, in order to generate concrete proof of concept and demonstrate real impact. And because we know that the issue is not simple a lack of finance globally, there is significant capital available, but what is missing is a sufficient pipeline of well-prepared investment-ready projects that can absorb this capital effectively. This initiative is designed to address exactly these bottlenecks in a very practical and targeted way. Perhaps we have also questions on the relationship with this system or initiative with GIA, Global Implementation Accelerator. We are working with our Brazilian colleagues on GIA, and of course, GIA aims to give high-level policy signals to the community on implementation, but this mechanism is very bottom-up and country-driven and implementation-oriented system. So these have linkages, but these are not overlapping generally. And let me conclude by emphasizing that this is not an attempt to solve every challenge at once or to replace existing systems. Rather, it's an effort to act as a catalyst, an accelerator that connects the dots between policy, projects, and finance and helps turn commitments into implementation. If designed and implemented effectively, we think that this approach can make it easier for countries to deliver on their climate goals, provide greater confidence to investors, and ultimately help translate global ambition into real, measurable outcomes. And we gave mandate to UNDP last month to further develop this idea and to seek the strategy and legacy for this initiative in the coming period. And thank you. I will stop.
Thank you, Tuğba. I just like to add an additional question very shortly. Will this new mechanism have a specific institutional framework, or will it have its board, or what is the structure you are thinking about that?
Yes. We are now working on the governance structure of the mechanism or the coalition. As I said, we didn't give the name up yet, but we will be working with UN and non-UN organizations under the structure, with MDBs, with private sector finance. There will be most probably a steering committee constituting of the co-presidencies, because consistency is very important and we want to include the coming co-presidencies also to the process. So now we are working on the governance structure of the system, and we will be sharing this very soon after one session, as I said. And by the way, we had also started to share our action agenda areas and to collect the feedbacks from the stakeholders in South Korea Climate Week. And we will be in London Climate Week and then to Baku. So we are trying to be as comprehensive as possible, and we also want to include all stakeholders to this process, because without collaboration and being inclusive, we think that it's not possible to have to achieve a great progress regarding the implementation.
Thank you. So I just directly pass the floor to Cosima about her comments on this. So based on what you have heard about this new proposed mechanism, what advice would you offer to Turkey in designing this initiative so that it can have the greatest possible impact in accelerating implementation? I think
Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks so much for the question, Umut, and thanks so much, Tujba, for laying out more details about the Powering Climate Action initiative. I think, I think a lot of how you framed it is exactly how we see it as well. I mean, I think the key thing is, in this world that we're living in, with 11 years since the Paris Paris Agreement has been signed, we've seen this huge proliferation of a lot of initiatives in a very rich ecosystem of initiatives which are kind of working towards, supporting implementation and supporting action. But there are gaps, and this system isn't working as efficiently as it should be, because if it was, we'd be on track to achieve the climate goals. So I think the key message, or the key proposal I would give when designing this one, is really being mindful of the other initiatives in the space, and designing it with very much the whole ecosystem in mind. I'll give kind of four kind of questions along that line to think about. And I think the first one is, how is this embedded in the UNFCCC architecture? So what is the interaction, for example, with the different work programs, with the mitigation work program, the just transition mechanism and work program, indice implementation, and NAP's implementation you mentioned should be at the heart of this. So how can we support that as the guiding principles? How is it contributing to GST2? I think you've mentioned a lot of these things, so they're very much on your mind, but really important that is at the heart of like how this is being guided. The second one that you also mentioned was how it relates to the Global Implementation Accelerator. As they're both in development at the moment, it's really great to hear that you're working closely with the Brazilians in the development to make sure that they are as aligned as possible. Because if the Global Implementation Accelerator is top down, and the Power and Climate Action is bottom up, where do they meet and how can they align and how can they support each other is really, really critical. So kind of having transparency on how that's designed, and also kind of, there's a lot of organizations also in the space thinking about what's needed from this, so kind of making sure that consultation is there, and that question is being asked and developed is critical. The third one is kind of relating to kind of how this relates to other bottom-up delivery architecture, and you've mentioned a few of the key ones that are operating, but this is a question that through consultation, for example, with the NDC partnership, with obviously working very closely with the UNDP on this, and others, it's really critical to kind of identify what are these actual barriers and what are the bottlenecks in translating into investable projects, and what's the Power and Climate Action initiative mechanism can operate. How can that complement as opposed to compete with these others? I'd say NDCP and NDC partnership is a key one to be working with, and kind of tapping into their efforts as well on kind of building this NDC support system, as opposed to having a new coordination mechanism, but really kind of supporting and supporting their work as well is going to be key here. I think Turkey also has the political legitimacy and power this year to really spur this action forward, and using this position as presidency, I think is a real opportunity. Also by placing the Power and Climate Action at the centre of the action agenda, and really bringing that link back in is going to be key here as well. And the final question to kind of bear in mind is this link to the finance, which again is something that you've touched on. How are you collaborating with multilateral development banks? How is this engaging or relating to the NCQG, the Loss and Damage Fund, other funds that are out there? And as I mentioned in my previous intervention, how is this linked to the Baku to Belém roadmap and the principles laid out there, as this is kind of the financial backbone of delivery? Really important to kind of use that as a basis for the design as well. Just to basically sum up, I think collaboration is key, and it's really great to hear that you are kind of having those conversations and making that progress. But just I think very important to make sure this can have impact by really kind of nailing in what are the gaps in the system, and where can this contribute to those.
Thank you. So I'll ask a similar question to Nuri.
but also what's your reaction to all these? But you are also in this, right? So as UNDP, you are supporting this initiative. So what is the role of UNDP in this new mechanism, and what is your opinion on how to design to have a better support for implementation?
This works? Okay. Works. Okay. This one. Okay. So thanks a lot, and we hear repeatedly the same questions. We also have the same questions, and I think it's the beauty of this, having lots of questions, but identifying what is the right question. Because, you know, I think it is a very brave move with the COP31, acknowledging COP30 GIA, last minute on the cover page, and then linking all the action agenda discussions with the 6 axes. It's also coming from COP30, Global Action Agenda Plan, and producing something with the motto of era of implementation. So I think it is the success and the point we are here now, I think discussing this kind of implementation focus is the success of the previous, you know, all inputs. So of course before Paris, but after Paris, and making the rule book, have some targets on finance, have some indicators on adaptation, have some move forward process. So I think it is a maybe critical opportunity for all of us, and having the, let's say, political push from COP31, which means, and here I think it is important to also seeing the, let's say, being on the same page is important. So COP31 presidency is a role for UNFCCC process and aligning with all COP discussions. So I think it is very important to understand every COP action agendas from the bigger perspective. And once we hear about this specific priority, we don't know the name yet, it can be mechanism or something, we really see the opportunity in terms of bridging not only the policy and implementation, but also bridging the discussions from negotiations to delivery, and making this 5-year-long process from 2026 to 2030 as the foundation of implementation. And why these years are important? 2030 is the action agenda, SDG agenda, right? We have 17 SDGs, and we need to move there. And as Tuba highlighted this year, there are 3 Rio conventions, not only climate, but biodiversity and land too. And actually all these architecture is under the umbrella of SDGs. So 2030 is critical year. And starting from last year on the NDC submissions, and coming from global stock takes, and biennial transparency reports deadline this year also, it is very important, is making this 2026 to 2030 period for no excuse but implementation. And now we have this opportunity to shape it together. So COP31.tr website and providing inputs are important, but also providing questions, as Cosima did. Okay, what does it mean for health? What does it mean for local implementation? What does it mean for public and private engagement? What does it mean for youth? So I think these questions will make the thing in mind more successful. And for UNDP, as I told, UNDP is always about implementation. So consider that the whole UN system. In the UN system, we are kind of development and finance-related organization. But this doesn't limit us to work only on climate, only on environment, or only on one part of the issues. UNDP is working for SDGs. So it makes us thinking always about how make alignment of the system on topics, on actors, on tools. So UNDP here is the system integrator or system alignment. And our interest here is also about this discussion about the climate and development nexus. Because yes, we have SDG on climate, but when you look at the climate change as a system, it is related with all 17 SDGs and maybe beyond. With the new AI and technology and everything, new discussions. So this climate and development perspective and implementation and trying to unlock the private capital through country-focused, country-tailored and country-context process is actually in our DNA. So I think it is very important for finding any opportunity and way to support this process. And thanks to COP31 presidency, I think it is important to highlight that a principle on making complementing what is existing. And it is very challenging actually, because everybody is doing something. There are lots of coalitions, platforms and everything. And let's acknowledge it, it is not helpful, it is not enough. We cannot solve this with this existing one. It doesn't mean to come up with something new, but let's think about how we can make the current process, existing actor system more effective and efficient. Should we focus on some different things? Should we give driving seat to the country perspective? And then how to make it really focusing on system change. So in system change, if we are talking about methane, or if we are talking about electrification, what are the bottlenecks within the system thinking? And acknowledging that every country has different capabilities, context, and needs. So this is, I think, very important, first on the complementarity, but also creating an additionality, not only just talking, but creating something additional. And this additionality part is actually coming from the focus of country-tailored diagnosis, because countries will tell this. And the complementary part is important because acknowledging all the great work, existing work, we need to also say and accept that it should be in a more effective way. And UNDP last year in Belém'den, tasked by UN Secretary General to coordinate the whole UN system for NDC implementation. So we have a responsibility to organize 30 plus UN agencies at global level, and all more than 170 countries, UN country teams to coordinate and understand how one action from UN system helps for the NDC implementation and adaptation plans and this process. So within this responsibility, I think COP31 presidency creates the bar, increase the bar, and asking a question, okay, this is the UN system plan, what about non-UN system to engage with? And here we are talking about many actors. And you remember in the first part I talked about the whole climate system, and UNFCCC is just one part of it. And in the real world, UN system is just one part of it. So it is important to find how we engage all actors, and also considering about things we discussed today will take some time to really materialize. So consider about Paris Agreement, or fund for responding loss and damage, or adaptation discussions. In COP13 I was there in talking about the adaptation, slowly. And now we are talking about something that we all believe to make a change, and it will take some time. And critical part here, if it will take some time, let's think about 2030, 2035, 2050. and try to see the real world from 2030. 4 years later, can we imagine what will be the technology or the geopolitics or the things? And considering all these picture into the delivery requires a political push with what COP31 provides us, but also requires a principle of complementing additionality and country-tailored implementation. So these principles, I believe, would take us to a, let's say, better position moving forward. But critical point here is asking the right questions. So all these questions are very relevant, I think very important, and we need to increase the trust and you know, this trust and collaboration part, I think, is important, because once we have the right questions, then we need to find this solution also together. It takes time, it requires system, and we have some systems already available, like this NASCA, UNFCCC, COP presidencies, and I think it is important to understand as individual, but also organizations, how I touch this system. So if there is a opportunity for providing your inputs through a website or something, let's use it. And if you have better questions, better ideas, let's raise it. And such, I think, platforms is very important. And having Tuğba here, I think, is also a good opportunity to, you know, show some signals from different parties about these discussions. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuri. Thanks to all these interventions. We have few minutes for questions, but using my moderator privileges, I'd like to ask one question to Tuğba. One is if you have any reactions to Cosima and Nuri, because they had some other questions. But I also want to ask one very early question, very premature question, that I guess it's not easy to answer, maybe. You may not answer, but hearing from Nuri that he said something very interesting, linking negotiations and delivery. Especially, you said this in terms of this mechanism. So my question is, should we expect something like a covered decision, including this mechanism and also maybe some others like electrification, etc., in Antalya? Maybe it's an early question, but if you can answer. But also if you have any other things to say to Cosima and Nuri. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, let me start with the issues that Cosima underlined. Actually, not only these 4 areas, there are many issues that we are trying to answer and trying to find a solution regarding GIA and complementary with this initiative, regarding the outputs of this initiative, how we can feed the UNFCCC processes like transparency issues, BTRs, etc. And of course, NCTG and Bakü to Belém roadmap, how we can bring, for example, private sector to this process, because these are all a part of that. Of course, support of the current mechanism, for example, the country platforms of GCF are very crucial. We are having great and very deep discussions with all our stakeholders, and as I said, it's not easy to formulate a very implementation-oriented initiative, a very detailed, comprehensive initiative, but we are taking all the issues into consideration, and we will, of course, deliver the results. When we come to the question regarding the potential, how to say, power decision or what, I don't know, I also don't know what will be. But the issue is we, as COP31 presidency, we are giving legacy. And all the initiatives and all the work that we are trying is built on the legacy and on the continuity. So, of course, we will be discussing and working on this area in the coming period, and we will see, of course, at the end of COP31. But as you said, electrification is very crucial, and we are working very hard on that issue. And the other one is this mechanism, not only these two topics, but the other ones are also at least to one level linked with the negotiations. For example, green industrialization is also took the negotiations on mitigation work program and the industry sector dialogues into consideration, or the youth agenda item is also taking the ACE negotiations into consideration, and so on. So the main idea behind this, as Nuri said, action agenda is becoming much more important according to the last years, and as it is also for the implementation. And because of that, we try to also link the negotiations with the action agenda, and so that we can also bring the real implementers to the process, and to also build the bridge between negotiations and the implementation. Lastly, I'm also very excited to see the results of the COP31 regarding the concrete outcomes, as you mentioned today.
Thank you. Okay, we can have some questions.
Teşekkürler. Thanks. Özlem from Can Europe. I have two questions for Tuğba Hanım and maybe for Nuri. Tuğba Hanım referred to methane when highlighting the priorities. So does this mean that Turkey will sign methane pledge? That's one question. Maybe you mentioned and I missed, by the way. And the implementation is clearly central to the narrative, but I mean, in this context, where does the fossil fuel phase-out position? Should we sort of accept it embedded in all those discussions, or is it something still being negotiated, and there's still time to think about the implementation side of it?
Thank you, Özlem. Is there any question? Maybe we can collect a few questions together. No more questions? So, yes, Tuğba Hanım, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Özlem Hanım. Regarding the methane, actually the main focus of the action agenda is the methane coming from landfills. And we are working on global emission reduction, methane emission reduction projections with International Energy Agency, and we will try to find a system regarding the methane deriving from the landfills, actually, because yes, there are many resources of methane from energy, oil, agriculture, and waste, but under action agenda of COP31, we will be focusing on the methane deriving from the waste sector. Regarding the second question, we, as COP31 presidency, also attended to Santa Marta conference, and as the COP presidency, we know that it's a very important process for this year, and there are many countries that are willing to work on that issue. issue, but on the side there are other countries that have different opinions. We are planning, and we are also doing so that to listen to every country, to every party, and to find a solution between them. But of course, you know, tough is not a negotiation track. But of course, the next year the conference will be held in Tuvalu, and the process will be ongoing. Regarding the transition of fossil fuels, under the action agenda, yes, we can say it is embedded, because when we talk to the decarbonization of hard to abate sector, of course there is the issue. Or when we come to the electrification of building sector or electrification of transport sector, it's also very close related with the fossil fuels. So we try to focus on the current how to say, prioritize areas of the parties from Petersburg dialogue and from IEA dialogues and from the bilaterals with the parties and etc. And we saw that electrification is number one priority from their side. So, but as you know, it's very closely related with the energy transition process. So we will be working on that issue in the coming periods.
Thank you. I'm still seeing if there's any other questions. Any remarks from your side? Final remarks, if you want. No?
Yeah, just to say. No, I'm just to say, yeah, thank you so much, Tuba, for all the insights that you've given on the Turkish thinking, and just to really reiterate the kind of importance of having these exchanges and being able to hear these views. And I think we're going to have hopefully many more opportunities to exchange, as I realise this is a developing mechanism, and you know the action agenda priorities are also developing. So just to highlight the importance of engaging with us as civil society, but also widely with other stakeholders and business and others. It's going to be an ongoing process, but we're all here to support a successful outcome. Thank you.
So thank you all of your speakers today, and thank you Tuba Hanım from Ankara. So now we end this session and we'll meet at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Please feel free to head up to the 6th floor and enjoy your lunch with the view. Okay, now we'll continue with our second session where we'll be discussing the transitioning away from fossil fuels, clean power systems, electrification, grids, and the broader policy and investment needs surrounding the agenda. And for this session, Öykü Şenlen will be moderating the session from E3G, along with our panelists Alkım Bağ from Şura, Matthew Webb from E3G, and Ümit Şahin from IPC, and Abdurrahim Durmuş from Directorate of Climate Change will be joining us online for the session. We can begin.
So, welcome everyone to the second panel of today, Accelerating the Transition from Fossil Fuels to Clean Power Systems, Policy Landscape, Infrastructure and Financial Needs. We have distinguished panelists here, and Dijan kindly introduced them all, but I will do it again. So we have the head of climate change of Istanbul Policy Center, and also our host for today, Mr. Ümit Şahin. We have here again the director of Şura Energy Transition Center, Ms. Alkım Bağ, and Associate Director of E3G's Global Clean Power Diplomacy Team, Mr. Matthew Webb. So today I will first turn to Matthew Webb to widen the discussion from the discussion on global climate diplomacy and what is the moving away from fossil fuels mean politically. So, Matt, from your perspective, what does the transition away from fossil fuels mean for climate diplomacy at this moment? And how should we understand the role of clean power systems in turning the GST2 outcomes, GST outcomes, and the COP30 roadmaps into practical international cooperation?
Thank you. Is that coming through okay? No. So,
Duyuluyordu galiba, değil mi? Speak now.
is that okay? Yeah. Without the mic?
I think so.
Yes.
It's
Good.
right.
All right. Thank you. So two very small questions, and I realise I said a few remarks initially this morning. I think on the first piece, I think we're in a really interesting situation, and I think I talked a little bit this morning about the drivers we're now seeing from fossil fuel volatility-driven impacts on on countries' economies. What is less clear at the moment is whether that's going to lead. Probably in the short term, it's going to lead to a more fragmented approach. Countries trying to take their own pathways and their routes forward, and it may well be for the next 6, 9, 12 months. We need to just create space for countries to go and explore their pathways, but always have an eye on future politics and the future international framework. So I think I won't go into depth around St. Martin because others are going to comment more about that. But I think what you saw there is symptomatic of where perhaps two things which others can expand upon. One is that countries really are worrying about the pathway forward, whether they be an importer or a producer of fossil fuels. Now, some countries stepped forward in the space that Colombia provided, and Lula's provocation as the COP president was pretty important. And he was talking about that pathway and roadmap for a good 18 months, and I think it took a while for the world to listen and start to think about it. Producer countries and importers of fossil fuels are now trying to work out their strategy through the next 10 to 15 years. And this is where it links back to diplomacy, most countries cannot go it alone. There was I love quoting other people's work because it means that they go and get read. A very interesting bit by Jason Bordoff, who writes out of Colombia. This illusion of energy independence and energy autarky, countries turning into their own reserves. Now, renewable energy is more distributed. It is less sensitive to the choke points. We've just done a report at E3G a few weeks ago about the critical choke points. However, most countries do not have the resources to go it alone. They need to partner. They need a well-functioning market for trading electricity, trading hydrogen if that's what they choose, getting those supply chain, the component, the diversification. So, whilst at the moment it looks as though countries are slightly turning in for safety, turning into different clusters, ultimately they're going to have to work together to have a stronger, more diverse clean energy market, and that will require more diplomacy and more collective action. If I use the word between allies, that's perhaps deliberate. Countries are going to countries that they trust and relationships they trust. Within all of that, there are ways of, we have to defend, we have to preserve, we have to keep moving forward the consensus framework that we've established 10 years ago. But at the moment, we should treat it as being definitely okay that you get pockets and groups of countries, 50s or 60s or 80s, let's not be too obsessed about the number, who are seeking action pathways together to try and work out what their new interactions are going to be. So I think, it's an exciting time. It may feel like a fragmented time. The challenge we've got is, as I said, is to keep one eye on the defence and then the advancement of the overall multilateral framework for the future, whilst also providing a really supportive environment for progressive pathfinders to move forward. Your question about the electric system, I mean, the system, I mean, I think we have to try, and I think this is definitely something that E3G has been trying to promote, we have to try and keep connected. There is most countries are going to have to find their own bespoke blend of different renewable resources, different degrees of interconnection. All countries are going to need more grids, more storage. Some countries might also supplement that with biofuels in the short term. Some countries may feel like nuclear is a transitional piece around baseload for them. I think at the moment we need to keep our eyes fixed on the prize, which is we have to move globally to a net zero power system between 2035 and 2040. I'll say that again, 2035 and 2040 globally. So what does that mean? We need better ways of learning, sharing learning, different instruments, technical support mechanisms to allow the learnings that are taking place in the UK and Germany to be absolutely happening almost in parallel in Indonesia with PLN. The pace of rewiring and the gap between north and south is shrinking all the time. And I would argue that if we've got our eyes fixed on basically removing the carbon emissions from the power sector and all the technical pieces that's needed, we shouldn't be too critical about the bespoke pathway that each country needs. So it does give a lot of room for, you're going to need lots of different forms of cooperation and technical partnership to move us forward. So that coherent, this is why, that when I put my slides up this morning, we shouldn't treat an electrification debate getting to a target in the mid-2030s. I think the IEA number is 32%, and we can probably go faster than that. We can't detach that from the need to get away from the 79% overall fossil fuel dependency and get that down to, more than half by the middle of the next decade. I'll pause there.
Well, thanks, Matt. That's a really useful framing to start from and to describe the current landscape we're in and what's needed in the international scene. And now I'll move on to Ümit. Ümit, you were recently in Santa Marta. And from an academic and civil society perspective, what are your main takeaways from the Santa Marta conference on the TAF agenda, and how do you think Turkey should engage with this agenda this year in its role of COP31 presidency?
Thank you, Öykü. I think this mic works, right? Okay. After Matt's quite, careful concentration about the current developments, I'll be a little bit more enthusiastic, especially after returning from Santa Marta. Before going to Santa Marta, I was quite skeptic, by the way. I was quite skeptic. Özlem is laughing, right? So I was quite skeptic that this Santa Marta process would somehow hurt, I was thinking, the COP process, because it's kind of a fragmentation of the climate negotiations or climate international climate scene. But after witnessed what happened in Santa Marta, by the way, it was a very long, very diverse, long meeting with a very diverse group, starting with the academic conference and then People's Summit and a lot of different stakeholders meetings, etc., and then it ended with this 2 days high-level segment. So I think it was a very interesting moment, and it is going to create a new push for the climate ambition. What I think is this. Why? Because the main idea behind the Santa Marta process was focusing directly on fossil fuels. Because we all know in the last 30 COPs and all these different agreements, COP decisions, etc., fossil fuels were always hidden somehow, and some of the other also important topics like deforestation, like waste, like some others, were also functioning like a little bit covering up what is going on in the fossil fuel field. So I think this Santa Marta process will put the fossil fuels in spotlight as we really need. This is really what we need. So we all know that fossil fuels must be phased out in the until maybe 2050s. So this process will maybe correct the general understanding of climate negotiations. The second one is, we saw that in Santa Marta that fossil fuels are not only about energy. Fossil fuels are, for example, the plastic pollution is another very important outcome of fossil fuel extraction and consumption, right? Also, a lot of other problems, ecological, important for the ecological crisis, like pesticides, etc., are also coming from fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are causing a lot of problems, about land use, about water pollution, about the land use rights of indigenous people or local people, etc. So the destruction of natural ecosystems. So fossil fuels is the problem, not only because of climate change. So we need to point out that we need to get rid of fossil fuels. So that process really showed that to countries, first of all, other countries. And of course, energy security is becoming one of the most important topic of today. So transitioning away from fossil fuels is also very important for that matter. Maybe we can a little bit underestimate the numbers, but I don't, because the number 60 countries, including EU, 60 countries attended. So this is not a very low number, including very important fossil fuel exporters like Australia, like Norway, Canada, Nigeria, Colombia, Mexico. These are all fossil fuel exporter countries. They were in Colombia was, of course, chairing it. So it was a very important, I think, moment that I think this will create a kind of motivation for other countries. I will talk about Turkey's role there, maybe in the second round, but Turkey's presence in Santa Marta was also very important, I think. Not only because of Turkey's COP31 presidency, but also because of Turkey's own transition away from fossil fuels. So if we can, if we want to look what happened in Santa Marta, the first thing I need to say is that it was not about the necessity of transition away from fossil fuels. It was about how to make it. This is a very important topic, because in the last 30 years or so, we always talked about and we tried to convince people and governments that phasing out fossil fuels is important. Now, in this conference, nobody talked about that. Everybody was talking about how do we do that? How do we overcome the barriers? How do we create institutional mechanisms or financial mechanisms to overcome these barriers? So that was the main idea behind this conference. For example, I was the participants of the academic conference. I also participated at the other parts, but I specifically went there for the academic conference. And academic conference had 18 different work streams working on very detailed topics like, for example, this ISDS, investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms, etc. It's a very important mechanism, and all these legal challenges for transition was on the table. Or, for example, how to overcome this locking in the extractivism was one of the topics. So there was a lot of interesting discussions there. One important outcome of Santa Marta was creating a new science panel. This science panel, it's not easy to understand the function of that, but we will see in the coming years. This is going to be a new science panel, smaller than IPCC, but focusing only on fossil fuel phase out. 150 scientists from all over the world participate in this science panel, co-chaired by 3 scientists from Cameroon, Brazil, and Germany. And this is specifically going to create some tangible policy proposals about how to overcome these challenges of transition. The few things, let me tell you a few things about what were the main outcomes of the academic conference. There were very interesting topics, as I said. I choose some of them. For example, developing national plans for transition away from fossil fuels and dismantle legal, financial, and political barriers resulting from fossil fuel lock-in was one of the important topics. So this is not only in the academic conference, but also in the People's Summit and also in the government, Colombia and Netherlands paper. This is very clear that now a new era is starting with a specific fossil fuel phase-out roadmaps of the countries. Now, we are not going to limit ourselves with the NDCs after that point, and we are going to have new fossil fuel roadmaps embedded in NDCs, or maybe different than NDCs, but somehow parallel with the NDCs. So this is going to be one of the most important outcomes of Santa Marta process. And then communicating fair, transparent, and evidence-based policies were important, because they say that public is generally supporting climate action, but all these false narratives, such as fossil CCS, etc., are important. So even banning fossil fuel advertising and lobbying was one of the most important outcomes or proposals out of Santa Marta conference. Or, of course, banning new fossil infrastructure was one of the important outcomes or proposals. Strengthening international cooperation and cooperation for fossil fuel phase out. This is an interesting point because, we already had this initiative for a new fossil fuel treaty, fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Only 18 countries are member of this initiative, but interestingly, from all the chapters of this Santa Marta conference, including the academic and People's Summit and the countries' Nations Summit, they all emphasized the need of a new fossil fuel treaty. I know this is extremely difficult. Maybe we can discuss upon that, because now, after countries only adapted themselves to Paris Agreement. So a new fossil fuel treaty would be a lot challenging. But still, this is one of the proposals from almost all chapters. And yes, and realigning international legal frameworks to support just transition away from fossil fuels, including this ISDC, investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms, and also including just transition mechanisms were among the outcomes of Santa Marta. Also from the People's Summit, there were very interesting outcomes. In the People's Summit, different groups like indigenous peoples, workers, feminists, youth, social movements, etc., peasants, farmers, fishermen, all these groups were discussed in a different ways, but I think several items were really outstanding after the People's Summit. The one of them is the fossil fuels are very much related on wars. Of course, everybody knows about that, including the war in Iran now. Everything is about fossil fuels. Sometimes fossil fuels are the reason of the wars, sometimes somehow unexpected result of the war, now this Hormuz crisis, etc. So fossil fuels are very much related to wars and militarism, so I think we really need to address this, not only because of the emissions of military emissions, but also all these linkages between fossil fuel dependency and all these geopolitical conflicts. And one thing I noted is decarbonization and defossilization. This was an interesting discussion in the People's Summit. And they said that we always talk about decarbonization. Decarbonization is, of course, about the reduction of emissions, reducing emissions. But decarbonization is, first of all, is not directly implying fossil fuels, but also it can be confused with things like CCS. So decarbonization, you always notice that, you know, this, what was the name of this? Unabated coal power, for example. What is unabated coal power? Nobody knows, but unabated fossil fuel, coal power plants were at kind of a distraction. So defossilization is kind of a solution to this distraction. This was one of the things. And one very important point from the People's Summit, where this was said by the special rapporteur on climate change on the human rights commissioner under UN. And she said that human rights must be at the center and are at the center of the struggle, of this fight against climate change. And this human rights are not optional. So states, governments are obliged to do things according to human rights. And as we know, this International Court of Justice last year decided that developing fossil fuels could bring responsibility to, in terms of human rights responsibility to the governments. I think we need to be very clear on fossil fuels after that point, especially together with this conference. Concluding that, some other things also discussed, maybe Abdurrahim Bey also can say about what was discussed in the high-level segment, but from the high-level segment outcomes, we can see diversification of the economy, creating new sectors, workforce transition, electrification, infrastructure, especially grids, storage, so Alkım will talk about that. Infrastructure transformation is very important part of this, and also a binding international agreement on fossil fuel phase-out is going to be important. So after Santa Marta, this process will continue. The second part will be in Tuvalu, with the cooperation of Tuvalu and Ireland. Probably the only high-level segment part would be in Tuvalu, probably. The other segments probably be in Ireland. And now, at least we have 4 countries coordination group, Colombia, Netherlands, Tuvalu, and Ireland. They are the coordination group with the contribution of some other countries like United Kingdom, Denmark, Brazil, France, and Marshall Islands. And these groups will take us to the second fossil fuel tough conference next year after the COP31, and there will be 3 groups or work streams of this second conference, or until the second conference. There will be about the development of comprehensive national and regional roadmaps for phasing out of fossil fuels. As I said before, this is going to be the new thing. The second is aligning cross-border trade policies with the transition away from fossil fuel. And the third is addressing issues related to financial architecture, particularly fiscal subsidy and debt traps that hinder the transition process. So, again, living with that I think this is going to be a turning point. And of course, all the other parts of the climate policy or climate negotiations, including adaptation, loss and damage, all are very important. But the real story is going on fossil fuels, and now we started to talk about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ümit, for sharing the outcomes and your reflections from Santa Marta. I'm also interested about the government perspective on this. So Tuba touched on this briefly during the first session in the morning. Turkey participated in the Santa Marta conference as the incoming COP31 presidency. Abdurrahim Bey, you were also in Santa Marta as a member of the delegation. From the Turkish delegation's perspective, what are your main reflections from Santa Marta, and what can we expect from the presidency regarding the tough agenda?
Thank you, good afternoon, everyone. I would have very much liked to be there in person, but I was unable to attend physically to the previously scheduled meeting this morning. Nevertheless, I am very pleased to be here with you online. I would like to sincerely thank the Istanbul Police Center, also E3G, for their kind invitation. I am truly pleased to be a part of this discussion together with such distinguished panelists. So maybe a quick start there, let me introduce myself. I am Abdurrahim of the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Policy Department at the Director of Climate Change under the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change of Turkey. Actually, I have been working in the public sector for 16 years, and more than 11 years of this experience has been dedicated to climate policy development process. My responsibility is the development and implementation of NDC, long-term climate strategy, and mitigation strategy and action plan. Also, I have been actively involved in the international climate negotiation under the UNFCCC for many years, actually since the Paris conference. At that time, I was a junior, particularly on the mitigation-related issues. Now I am contributing to the preparation of the climate action agenda. Now, currently, your question, first of all, I think it will be useful to look at the broader process before directly focusing on the Santa Marta conference to understand the overall picture. So, as you know, as all know, one of the most important the Paris Agreement, the Paris Agreement, what was built on the bottom of our point, is the global secretary. The global secretary is essentially the platform through which collective progress of the countries toward achieving toward achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement is assessed. At COP28, the first global strategic decision was adopted. One of the key elements of this GST decision is that the decision was the calls on the parties transition by fossil fuel in just order equitable manner, accelerating action in this critical decade. So actually, after that I will use the acronym TAF. So now I would like to turn to Belém. At COP30 in Belém last year, the Belém Declaration on Transitionary Fossil Fuel was launched, and this declaration was supported by 24 countries. After that, discussion continued during the COP30 negotiation regarding the reference, could be a reference to TAF in the cover decision of the COP30. While 83 countries supported this position, other parties were less comfortable with such references. At the closing session of COP30, the presidency announced that it will prepare and present the roadmap on TAF. Also, it was also announced that the first TAF conference will be organized under the co-hosting of the Colombia and the Netherlands. So I summarized the whole process until now. So now, I would like to connect this process to the Santa Marta conference. I think one of the most important aspects of this conference was that it created a space to discuss the tough issue that had become somewhat confined within the formal UNFCCC negotiation process. As you know, in negotiation parties define their position very strongly, which is a predetermined position. So often this limits the possibility of going deeper into the dimension of the tough issue. So also, in this regard, the conference provided an important platform for parties and stakeholders to openly discuss the different aspects of the TAF. I would like to also highlight another important feature of the conference. Actually, we as a government official, we participated in the high-level segment, which was government-oriented. Ümit Bey followed more of academic and NGO discussion. I think the structure and the conference was designed quite effectively for two reasons. First, it was not limited only to government, so under the negotiation, only the government could participate in the discussion. So it brought together academia, NGO, community, local communities, and other stakeholders, allowing different voices, perspectives to be heard. Second, also many of the thematic sessions focus on understanding that the TAF will differ significantly depending on national circumstances. Therefore, instead of remaining trapped within this certain narrative, actually, Ümit Bey has mentioned during the negotiation process, generally we are trapped into the phase-out coal, phase-out unabated coal, or phase-out fossil fuel, or phase-out unabated fossil fuel. So, the conference created space to discuss the technical, social, economic, political dimension of the transition in a more comprehensive way. Under the high-level segment, we discussed energy access, fiscal dependence for changing energy security and sovereignty, phase down and close of fossil fuel extraction, financial mechanism, economic reliability, reconversion, it is linked to the just transition, so collective action to address the gap. So, but also I would like to, I think it would be useful to mention about the participation of the government. So only almost 60 countries participated in the conference. So there was an absence from some of the major, one of the leading countries in the climate negotiation process. So I think this was the negative aspect of this conference. Now I would like to turn to COP31 presidency. As you know, COP31 president designate His Excellency our Minister Murat Kurum has sent the UNFCCC his first letter, and this in this letter it is stated that we are building a COP31 process around the three main principles. One is the dialogue, consensus, and action. So, from our perspective as a COP31 presidency, the Santa Marta conference provides an opportunity for us as the incoming COP31 presidency to engage with parties and stakeholders and to listen them carefully, to understand the behind of this tough issue, what are the perspectives of the countries, so etc. So also another important point I would like to emphasize that as you see, as you see the press release of the conference, as a output of this conference, Colombia and Netherlands announced that they will prepare a report to submit Brazilian presidency roadmap to support the process. Also, Brazil has mentioned about that they requested inputs from all parties about how can develop their roadmaps of the on top. So they stated that they got feedback for more than 400 submissions to lead into this roadmap. So also in the outcomes of the conference, you could also see that the report of the conference will be submitted to the COP30 presidency during the London Climate Week. Also during the New York Climate Week, the report also will be submitted to the UN Secretary General. We are also there is a willing to linkages the outcomes of the first TAF conference with the second TAF conference, which will be held in 12 to the outcome of the second GST. So also as a COP31 presidency, we are working closely with the COP30 presidencies during this year. Also next year, under the Troika umbrella, we continue our work with the Brasilia. So also at the same time, you also know that the COP process remains a party-driven and consensus-based process. Therefore, together with Brasilia, working with them closely, we intend to approach the inputs, the roadmap for our inputs, the roadmap which will be prepared by the Brazilian presidency and outputs emerging from the TAF conference in open and transparent manner. So then we are planning to discuss issue with others, other stakeholders, and other parties that didn't participate in the conference. So, as I tried to explain, this is the UNFCCC process. As a COP31 presidency, our responsibility is to facilitate the dialogue between the parties and to try to get together all parties on the table to move forward, not on the top issue but also all issues. Now I stop here for the first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for sharing your views and for summarizing the outcomes of Santa Marta high-level segment, and also how the tough agenda will be taken up by the COP31 presidency this year. So now I'd like to move from political to technical. So Alkım, electrification and grids are increasingly discussed as core enablers of the energy transition. So from your perspective, what are the main opportunities and bottlenecks in this agenda item, and how do you assess Turkey's own pathway on electrification and grid modernization?
Thank you. So yes, as you mentioned, Öykü, electrification is increasingly becoming central to the global energy transition agenda, and rightly so, because if we want to decarbonize our economies, it's not enough only to decarbonize power generation. We also need to transform how we consume energy, especially in the energy-intensive sectors like industry, buildings, and transportation. So, in short, we need to decarbonize the demand side, the consumption side as well. So, today, electricity accounts for 20%, approximately 20% of the global final energy consumption. And the remaining 80% still comes mainly from fossil fuels. So the real challenge ahead is not only producing clean electricity, but also increasing the share of electricity in final energy consumption, and also provide this increasing electricity demand from clean energy resources, mainly renewable energy. And I also want to emphasize that electrification also leads to energy efficiency, because it eliminates the conversion losses and waste heat losses associated with fossil fuels. So when combined with digital technologies, electrification enables smarter and more efficient energy use, leading to significant energy savings in end-use sectors. So this is why electrification is becoming such a critical transformation tool. It supports climate goals, reducing emissions. It also strengthens energy security, reducing import dependency. It improves competitiveness, industrial competitiveness, and increases energy efficiency, as I explained. So many projections today suggest that the share of electricity in final energy consumption could rise from today's 20% to approximately 50%, at least 50% by 2050. But of course, there are some major bottlenecks. So the first one is the grids, because increasing electrification means increasing renewable energy capacity additions, and this requires, of course, strong, flexible and smart grids. But in many countries, the transmission and distribution systems were built decades ago and designed mainly for fossil fuel use. So this is the first bottleneck, and that's why electrification and grids are somehow linked. Second, electrification requires large upfront investments, whether we're talking about electrical vehicles, storage, industrial transformation, or heating systems. And third, fossil fuel subsidies and distorted pricing mechanisms often continue to undermine the competitiveness of electric technologies. For instance, I can give an example from Turkey. In Turkey, there is a large potential for heat pumps, especially in the coastal regions, but it is not feasible because today the subsidies on natural gas is higher than the subsidies on electricity. So it needs some targeted, subsidy arrangements and tariffs. And if we come to Turkey today, similar to the global situation, the share of electricity in final consumption is around 20% in Turkey. The official target, the official 2035 target, is to increase electrification to 25%, and 2053 target is to increase it to 56%, in line with the net zero target of Turkey. I think there is still room to improve this medium-term target, especially because Turkey has a high potential for electrification. With some regulations and with some adjustments, it can accelerate the pace of electrification. So according to Shura models and studies, the 2035 target should be at least 30%, and it's a realistic and doable target. From a sectoral perspective, industry is the largest energy consumer in Turkey, accounting for more than 30% of final energy demand. And if we account indirect consumption, it triggers like the transportation, it accounts almost half of final energy consumption. And at the same time, industry today consumes 71% of coal and 39% of natural gas. The good news is that with current technologies, electrification is already possible in many industrial sectors, especially the ones requiring low heat temperature, like food, textiles, and chemicals. And for harder to abate sector, electrification is possible up to a point, but then indirect electrification, like hydrogen power to X, will be important for these sectors. For buildings, 60% of buildings are using natural gas, 34% is using coal. Electrification share is only 6% in Turkish building sector. And in transport, the sales of electric vehicles are increasing very rapidly, but still the existing share is around 1%. So it is important to emphasize that there is a huge potential in Turkey for accelerating electrification in all these sectors. Of course, it will be important to establish long-term and predictable policy framework for electrification, especially setting sector-specific targets and action plans will be important. Another important issue is gradually phasing out fossil fuel subsidies and designing targeted incentives that promote electrification and enhancing the competitiveness of electrification through incentives, targeted support systems, and through mechanisms like carbon pricing will be important. And COP31 represents a strategic opportunity in this sense for Turkey to present its medium-term electrification roadmap and implementation tools to the international community. So at COP31, Turkey could lead a visible coalition of governments signaling electrification as one of the core pillars of global energy transition, which will help to anchor market expectations and investments. It is also important to start a discussion on a global electrification target, to set up a global electrification target for 2035. It will also be important to integrate these targets to national frameworks with countries committing to embed electrification in NDCs, sectoral strategies, and system planning. And of course, finance is another important aspect. So stronger alignment of international finance with development finance institutions and partnerships, explicitly incorporating electrification into energy and infrastructure portfolios will be important. Of course, when we are talking about accelerating electrification, automatically we come to the topic of grids, because electrification and increased renewable energy capacity means that we need stronger, smarter, and flexible grids to integrate this capacity in a reliable manner to the power system. However, when we look at the global situation, we see that the grid investments required for this transformation are lagging behind the pace of renewable energy deployment and electrification. So this is one of the grids, one of the main bottlenecks for global energy transition. So the main challenges here, again, as I mentioned, aging infrastructure in many countries. Insufficient investment and financing, because grid infrastructure requires massive long-term capital investments, while many countries face economic constraints, high financing costs, or limited access to affordable capital. Another problem is lengthy permitting and approval processes, as in the renewable energy projects. So this should also be solved. Lack of system flexibility is another problem. Insufficient storage, demand-side management, digitalization, and flexible generation capacity limits the ability of grids to integrate more renewable energy. And finally, an important aspect is climate change itself and the extreme weather constraints, events like wildfires, heat waves, storms and floods. These all create an increasing pressure on the grids. So this also is an important topic, increasing the resilience of grids originating from climate change. So if we again come to Turkey actually starts from a relatively strong position here. Renewables already account for 62% of installed power and 43% of power generation. And the Turkish transmission system actually provides a strong basis for increasing renewable energy capacity. According to Shura studies, it is possible to increase the share of renewables in power generation to 60 to 70% by 2013 by only doing the already planned investments and by integrating some flexibility solutions. So yes, COP31 is also another opportunity to go ahead for grids, because COP29 and COP31 successfully elevated political recognition of grids, including through the global grids and storage pledge and its integration into the action agenda. So the focus should be in the integration of grids into national energy planning, with countries embedding quantified targets for 2030, 35, 40, and storage targets into national and regional energy strategies, establishing grids and storage as core pillars of energy transition and energy planning and security. Scaling up financing will be important again. So aligning public and private capital with national planning and targets to deliver the infrastructure required for the tripling goal will be important, maybe setting again some targets to increase the required investment might be useful. And also commitments of expanded technical assistance and capacity building to support countries, utilities, and operators to plan, modernize, and reform their grid and storage systems will also be important.
Thank you, Alkım. So I think TAF and electrification will be discussed together quite frequently this year. So it's extremely helpful to hear both political and technical sides of this issue. For the second round, I'll come back to Ümit. So, Ümit, what would a meaningful progress on this agenda would look like in the lead up to COP31, and where do you see the biggest gaps between political commitments and implementation?
Thank you. Well, I'll start with Turkey's role first, because Turkey is the COP31 president, and Turkey's role in this tough agenda is very important. First of all, we need to understand that in Turkey, also in Turkey, in many parts of the world, people and many people in the policymakers community also started to understand that fossil fuels are no more a source of wealth or growth or development, but it's a liability. Not only an environmental liability, but also economic liability. So we, of course, it's very challenging to phase out fossil fuels altogether, but this is a must, and Turkey, I think all over Turkey, people started to understand this fact. I have one very promising quote. Speaking at the opening of the 17th Petersburg Climate Dialogue in Berlin last month, Murat Kurum, COP31 President and Minister of Environment and Climate Change, he said a very important sentence. I'm just quoting directly from the Anadolu Agency. Murat Kurum said, recent energy supply disruptions demonstrated that fossil fuels do not guarantee energy security, underlying the importance of diversifying energy sources and accelerating investment in clean energy for stability and resilience. So, in the traditional policymaking of Turkey, renewable energy was more like additional energy supply, right? So it was more like for growth, how to keep up with the economic development, economic growth, because our energy demand is growing, so we also need renewable energy. Now, these words are saying a different story. These words are saying that also we heard from in different circumstances that this transition from fossil fuels also creating stability and resilience. So I think Turkey's participation to Santa Marta conference was a very important turning point for Turkish climate and energy policy. Of course, this was somehow facilitated by Turkey's role, hosting role of COP31. We know that. Turkey was specifically invited because of Turkey's role, presidency role. But I think this is a big opportunity for us that Turkey became a part of this new process from the beginning, from the inception in Santa Marta. And Turkey will be attending to the second conference in Tuvalu as the president of COP31, right? So next year. So, and in the future also Turkey will be an integral part of this process, I believe. I think we really need to use this opportunity to accelerate transitioning away from fossil fuels also in Turkey. Also, Murat Kurum noted in Petersburg conference that Turkey's progress in reducing fossil fuels is going on, stating that nearly 60% of its installed capacity now comes from renewable energy, and reaffirming commitment to 2053 net zero emissions targets. So these are very strong signals, I guess, that Turkey is going to be or Turkey is going to support the transition away from fossil fuels agenda also in COP31, if it appears, of course, but I hope that it will appear in the COP process. Coming to your question about what are the biggest gaps between commitment and implementation, one of them is some words can create, some concepts can create opportunity, but also they can create some kind of a distraction. For example, one of them is diversification. Diversification is a good word. Diversification also means increasing the share of renewable energy or increasing electrification, etc. So diversification is good. But sometimes diversification may also be a kind of a distraction, because the arrow or the where we are transitioning from is very clear in the climate negotiations, right? We are not transitioning from any energy source to any other energy source. We are transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables. Nuclear is questionable, I know. I'm very much against nuclear energy, so I'm not going to say anything about that. I think it's also a very big distraction, especially for countries like Turkey, because Turkey doesn't have any technology background, anything about nuclear, so it's a big distraction. But anyhow, so we need to transition, we need a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But diversification itself, if you only say diversification, it can mean different things. Like, for example, more than 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, Turkey's energy strategy was only diversification. And even you may remember that there was this idea that 20%, 20%, 20% of all the different sources, right? This is diversification, but this is not transitioning away from fossil fuels. So I think we need to be careful about this kind of concepts. The second one is another distraction with the false solutions, of course, like CCS, etc. So this is also where we need to be very careful. And electrification, of course, Alkım already said a lot of things about that. The electrification is also not optional, because I hear also many things, also in internet, etc., that the electrification is one of the ways, but also you can find others like hydrogen as fuel, etc. This is not optional. So if you really want a real energy transition to renewables, you need electrification. So that's not optional. I think this is also very important. And last but not least, now we are focusing on implementation, which is very important. I 100% support Turkish presidency's focus on implementation. But implementation does not mean more ambitious targets are outdated. Okay? We still need more ambitious targets. Without a target, without an absolute emissions reduction target, without a real fossil fuel phase out, first of all, of course, coal phase out target, what are you going to implement? First, we really need to have real targets. I'm talking especially in terms of Turkey's domestic climate policy. Then we really need to power implementation with all these policy tools. Yeah, so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Ümit, for laying out where Turkey stands, what are the gaps, and why focusing on diversification might be distracting. Now, I will turn to Matt. So, Matt, COP31 will inherit some important work from COP30 in Belém, including the roadmaps. What do you think, what should Turkey do to carry out this work forward in a way that strengthens international cooperation and by keeping the tough politically visible?
Thank you. And if I might have the license to speak around that a little bit too. There's been such interesting comments about Santa Marta. I said to my team I had a massive fear of missing out by not being in Santa Marta. We had several of my team and several of the secretariats that we support, including the Power and Particle Alliance, were represented there. So, but it's wonderful to be. We need to be talking about what a different conference that was, and in a really weird way. Although it wasn't perhaps easy in the end game between Brazil and Colombia, there's some massive similarities between what the Brazilians were asking us to do in the negotiations. You know, put down our differences, be more thoughtful, be more collective, be more energized, mutual, and then you're seeing that spirit coming out in a different space. And I think that is, absolutely amazing. And I have to say, just a couple of things which struck me. The tone and the way that the different pieces of the events were put together was very special, and I think the Colombians and the Netherlands need a lot of credit for the way they constructed that conference. And let's just be honest, it's not the safest thing to go and do as a national government if you're a user or a producer of fossil fuel, to say I am going to go and join a high-level ministerial segment and listen. I don't know, actually, I saw an earlier agenda, it may have changed in the last few days, but take on board all that feedback, the science feedback, the community feedback, the indigenous community feedback, take that in, be exposed to it, and then talk about how we're going to move forward. I mean, that's, I think it's quite remarkable. And just as a sign of like cut through, and I'm saying this this isn't self-promotion because my colleague should have done this, but we got rung up by the BBC, our main radio news programme, straight after the conference, said, what is this thing? What does it mean? What's this? What's next? And that's cut through. I mean, it's the main news program. It's, and that doesn't usually happen. So I think it is really important. I'm sorry, I'm digressing from your question. I will get to the question in a second. I also just thought what was really striking. I think I might feel that way. Try again. I thought what was also really striking was we saw a really interesting approach where governments were prepared to go there. Obviously, the team around the Non-Proliferation Treaty, were instrumental in getting this thing to happen. But governments did go there and go, we want to go down this direction of travel, but we really want to respect this complementarity. So the piece in that declaration is really interesting because it's going, we've got to make progress. We think this is a useful space. But as you mentioned, these are deliberate hook points to take this back to the presidency and the UN process. This wasn't being set up by those governments that attended as we just can't get our stuff done over there with the Paris Agreement, therefore we're quitting it. It was very balanced, it was very poised. It's like, we need a space to have this debate, but we are going to be sending reports and pieces back, and you've referenced the points at London and referenced the point at the UNSU. It's a very deliberate reference point to say, we are going to take this back into the UN framework. And I think that's quite a delicate balance, and we've got to, and this comes to the question here. The wonderful thing about being the COP president is you have choices. you have choices as to how you want to steward, the messaging at the leader level, the action agenda, the negotiations, and I'd argue there is a responsibility now to carry forward these important conversations. And somebody I worked with years ago, and I'm only dropping his name because you should all read his book, the late Pete Betts, who was a very important figure around Paris. One of the things buried in his book is sometimes process is everything. We don't know how to resolve perhaps this discussion right now, so we need to find process to sustain it. And I'm not laying down a challenge here, but simply noting something has happened is not sufficient. We need a pathway through to say, we have started this dialogue has been started with this initiative, the Brazilian presidency. We need to acknowledge the efforts of others, and we need to put a pathway forward into the next presidency, working with Ethiopia. And I just want to say, I think we all need to have we need to take a real perspective shift here and think about how difficult it was for, let's say, the African Negotiation Group, perhaps, who were having a very difficult time around the adaptation finance target, around the indicators debate at Belém'den. Suddenly you have this fossil fuel roadmap issue come out of nowhere. What does it mean? What does this piece mean? We have to be thinking about what are the benefits of not building in dependency on fossil fuels for countries who are growing energy use per capita, trying to clean up cooking, get energy access, but also get rich in the transition, a more equitable balance, more value added in the continent of Africa and its countries. And I would suggest there is ample opportunity to explore that dimension of what the transition roadmap looks like and build that into the next presidency. And I think if we can get that transference of momentum, accepting that we don't have all the answers, we don't know how to get consensus yet, that's fine, but we need a vehicle, we need a process to do that. I think that is critical for the fossil fuel work. And as I said this morning, I think we now have difficult debates and dialogues around finance from Baku to Belém'den, the roadmap. We need to show how that is mobilizing. We have this piece around the transition away from fossil fuels. And, let's not forget the TFFF, have I got enough Fs in the forestry thing? Important initiatives from deforestation. I saw that deforestation the rate has dropped slightly in the last 12 months, in part due to what Brazil is doing domestically. And, I think there was 9 billion or more pledged into that initiative. So that is, again, an important issue to take forward. So I think the beauty of being a COP presidency is you do have a choice. You can, there are ways in which you can prioritise things that are not on the formal negotiation agenda, and I think there is a responsibility to shepherd and steward those dialogues forward, and be reciprocal to, I think, the respect that the Santa Marta conference has paid to the UN process in the way that it summarised its conclusions. I think that's a real important sign, and if we can get reciprocal approach from the COP presidency, that would be really powerful. Does that sort of answer your question? Öykü's then going, eventually. Sorry.
I'm going to say thank you for providing a wider perspective and highlighting that sometimes process is everything. So we talked about political and technical sides of the debate, but I'd like to focus on the social side as well. Alkım, how does electrification and intersect? Sorry. So how does electrification and grids agenda intersect with just transition, and particularly for regions and workforces are still very tied to fossil generation? And in Turkey, which communities and sectors are most need to be brought into this conversation, and what policy and investment choices would help ensure that the shift from coal to clean or fossil to clean works for them as well?
In the near term, as we talked since the beginning of this panel, in the near term, we expect that wind and solar capacity, electricity networks and flexibility solutions would be scaled up, while electrification would accelerate in energy-intensive end-use sectors like industry, buildings, and transportation. And as clean electricity capacity grows and system integration improves, older fossil fuel plants would be gradually phased down. So this is the strategy which should be supported by regional transition plans, investments in clean industrial development, and also by just transition policies, by social policies. So clean power systems can create new economic opportunities for fossil fuel dependent regions, strengthen industrial competitiveness, and improve household welfare, but only if investment, planning, and social policy are aligned from the start. So planning is really important, and in order to plan, you need a roadmap. So Turkey is successful in many aspects of energy transition, especially in renewable energy. There are significant improvements in energy efficiency, although there is room for further improvement. There is a huge potential for electrification. It has a strong, grid with flexibility measures, with targets to strengthen it further, is already planned. But the biggest gap in the Turkish energy transition is the lack of a fossil fuel phase-out plan. So although, today public institutions started to plan for just transition, a national just transition strategy is under preparation, but the lack of an integrated approach still prevents the issue from being planned in a comprehensive manner across all dimensions. So it's something that is actually preventing the planning. This is the biggest problem, just transition planning. So therefore it's important for Turkey to clarify its longer term post-2035 net zero plan or net zero roadmap. In terms of the sectors, the priority sectors that should be, discussed within the just transition perspective. The first one is the coal sector, mining and power generation included, and then CBAM-related sectors. Today it's iron and steel, cement, aluminium, and fertilizers, but the scope will increase. So a gradual phase out of coal mining and coal-fired power generation, together with the transformation of production in CBAM sectors, is expected to result in slower growth in production and employment compared to business as usual scenarios. And when we're talking about coal regions, we're also talking about preventing employment contraction or policies like reskilling. And when we're talking about CBAM sectors, we're more talking towards equipping workers with new skills. So there are different policies like transformation, skills transformation, or reskilling, diversification of regional economies, or regional economic activities, and creation of new employment opportunities, or supportive policies for workers facing difficulties in re-employment. So there are different options, but in order to progress on this matter, again, clarifying our long-term roadmap, a fossil phase-out plan is very important, because, for instance, for coal, the share of workers in the coal mines, coal sector is small, 0.2% in total employment, but they are concentrated in specific sectors. So we have to plan it, we have to analyze and plan it, and according to different regions, there should be different regional policies, just transition policies, integrated with the regional development plans. So this is why I think COP31, again, creates an important opportunity for Turkey to set up its longer-term targets and at least to soften its approach, at least to some extent. It will be important to recognize that, first of all, electrification and renewable energy are already beginning to reduce fossil fuel demand and can be rapidly scaled up within this decade. And then to provide a pathway to integrate this increased electrification and renewable energy with a fossil reduction of, with the reduction of fossil fuels. Creating this linkage and providing a pathway will be very important, very valuable. And also to operationalize the just transition mechanisms agreed at COP30 and strengthen practical tools and access to finance for the planning and implementation of national just transition strategies are also important. So this would not only strengthen Turkey's domestic energy transition, but it could also help Turkey to attract more green investment, benefit from just transition partnerships and funds, and position itself as a practical example of other emerging economies navigating similar challenges.
Would you like to take some?
So I just wanted to amplify just what you were saying there. I just couldn't quite contain myself, so apologies for grabbing the mic. I just think the opportunity that you're describing there for Turkey is so critical. It's like a strengthened renewable plan and work on electrification and grids, which really plays this critical electrification agenda as electrification doubles, it's going twice as fast as energy demand, and the ability to then say, we can now look again at what we used to say about the need for new coal, and we can put that under review, and we can signal that if we need global benchmarks, and I talked this morning about where structurally coal is going globally, we should be moving to a point in the next 2 years where we set that global benchmark for coal as the dirtiest polluting fuel, that we do not need to build that new infrastructure anymore, and that benchmark globally. We nearly got there under the Brazilian presidency. Latin America is essentially about one plant free from being free of new coal plants. We are so close. That is such an essential benchmark. So I just wanted to amplify what you were saying there. I think that bridge between domestic leadership and then what that means in that wider agenda, both for electrification, for coal and TAF, is just really powerful. So very well said. I'm sorry for grabbing the mic.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alkım and Matt, for pointing out long-term planning and setting targets are key for a successful just transition. Finally, I will return to Mr. Abdurrahim Durmuş to bring the discussion to a close. So, Mr. Durmuş, Turkey's domestic agenda on mitigation, clean energy, electrification and grids will inevitably change how it leads during COP31. So how does the presidency see the interaction between these national priorities and its international role this year? And how can the COP31 platform can be used to advance both the domestic transition and the credible global agenda on moving away from fossil fuels? Thank you.
Thank you, Öykü Hanım. Actually, our panelists have provided really very good insights what could be what co-presidency could be doing during this COP31 presidency. So first of all, actually I would like to first of all, we need to look at the global picture. Actually, Ms. Alkım has said the global energy framework very well. She mentioned about the integration would be around 20% of the emission reductions, etc. Also, last year in 2024, the 700 gigawatt of renewable capacity was added globally. So actually, when we look at the global picture, generally we see that electrification is becoming the backbone of this transition. So also Ms. Alkım several times emphasized that electrification could be a main priority of the COP31 presidency. So also we think that we should do all efforts indicating the electrification, which could be the main topic of our COP31 presidency. So for also when we look at the national perspectives, Europe, Turkey has realized from 2053, so we shape our long-term climate strategy, climate mitigation strategy, and action plan, our second NDC based on this target. So actually, LTA's long-term climate strategy has provides a long-term vision and set the policies to be implemented to target. NEC set the midterm target, and mitigation and action plan is the implementation tool of this NEC. So also I would like to mention about the NEC. So NECs are defined under the Paris Agreement. So every country, all parties should set a new NDC every 5 years. Also, new NDC should be more ambitious than previous one. Actually, this is the process. So we submitted our second NDC last year. So we changed our reference scenario, mitigation scenario, etc. Also, we changed our 2030 target. We set more ambitious target for 2050, 2035. So our every NDC will be more ambitious than previous one, and we under this climate procedure, we are aiming to reach net zero target in 2050. Also, other than our strategy and action plan, is that we are the climate change is a coordination body between among the national government institutions. We always working. We are always working very closely with the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, Industry and Technology. So so our all climate policy documents are very aligned with the other policy documents which are developed, which was developed by the other ministers. For example, our NDCs, long-term climate strategy, or our mitigation action plan is fully aligned with the national energy plan provided by the Ministry of Energy and the Natural Resources. So this whole framework constitutes core policy framework for the guiding this transition. Also, Ms. Alkım mentioned about what have done Turkey so far. So our renewable capacity reached more than 60%. Our capacity share has exceeded more than 60% of all capacity. Also last year, almost 44% of our energy, our electricity production came from the renewables. Also, we have a very ambitious target for 2035. So now, also as I said, electrification is becoming becoming one of the most important pillars of the energy transition globally. Also, electrification is becoming one of the centers of Turkey's domestic transition strategy. So now I would like to mention about COP31 priorities. As you know, Turkey shared priorities under the climate action agenda. It includes clean energy transition. So clean energy transition. So under this clean energy transition, electrification, grid infrastructure, so technology and flexible and renewable will be the main focus area, but the electrification is the first main, the most important area under our climate agenda. So also I have actually this is also I would like to I want to make some comments on some intervention from Paris. So maybe for the COP31 presidency, so our approach for as I stated, our approach to the COP31 presidency will be guided principle. One is the consensus, dialogue, and action. So we define COP31 is the COP of the future with the focus on implementation. So during this, we define this process actually as a delegation member during the COP process. Maybe you remember at the COP28 that the phrase of the transition for the fossil fuel, the first phrases in this decision text was very different. It started from the phase out fossil fuel, phase out unregulated fossil fuels, then the countries agreed on the transit of fossil fuels, but also the framing at the beginning of the decision is very important. So it says that also parties. So I mentioned this issue because this is the process. This is the negotiation process. This is the dialogue process. This process should be conducted in a balanced, transparent manner with all stakeholders, including governments, NGOs, private sector, youths, local communities. So as a co-presidency, our responsibility is that to conduct this process with, as I said, with a balanced, trust and transparent manner, and to reach concrete outcomes at the COP31. So as a COP31 president, we would like to host a very successful COP. So it will to summarize the COP process. As I said, this is the process. So we will try our best to conduct this process and engage with all parties to reach common outcomes of the COP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdurrahim Bey, and for pointing out you will carry out the COP process in an inclusive way. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank all of our panelists and look to the floor for questions. I see Özlem's hand.
Thank you. My question is for Abdurrahim Bey. Thanks a lot for your contributions. What I understand from your presentation, there is sort of a will or perspective or motivation at COP presidency side about actually to move forward this agenda. I mean, when after hearing your takeaways related to Santa Marta or Brazilian tough roadmap, are we going to sort of a concrete implementation or decision when it comes to Turkey's tough agenda, like a signal related to coal policies, like a no-new coal policy, or starting a coal exit discussion in Turkey by COP? Is it likely to see such a concrete step?
Thank you. Could I answer? May I answer? Yes. So,
yes.
Thank you very much for your question. So, we participated in Santa Marta conference as a COP31 presidency, and during our statement there we emphasized that we will listen carefully to all parties and all perspectives about the tough issues. So at the our role is to collect all views and to engage all parties to not only for the top issue but also all other issues. How can move forward this issue? But this is, as I said, this is a particular process. And also, I would like to share my experience in my first plan negotiation. It's from morning until 3 a.m. We only discuss one phrase. So at 3 a.m. in night, we close the meeting without reaching an agreement. So, but I would like to also emphasize that Santa Marta conference is well designed and to provide countries to share their ideas about the top issue from different perspectives, also to create a space to countries to engage each other, to understand each other on the top issue. So when it is confined in negotiation process, it could be more difficult to move through. But the initiative like Santa Marta, I think is very complementary to this process. So for the question on the phase out of coal in Turkey. So in Turkey we have already established policy decision mechanism on the climate change. We have climate change adaptation board, which was the head of this board is the ministers are representing at the minister level. So under this board, there are a technical working group. One is the mitigation working group. So all decision related to all discussion are conducted under this framework, under this framework. So we always think about our partners. So also I would like to mention about that we don't. So the issue, phase out issue, could be discussed, but it depends on it is not up to only us. It is up to all partners, including Minister of Energy, Minister of Industry, Minister of Transport, etc. But also, I would like to share my view. So during my intervention, also I tried to emphasize that actually it could be more useful to confine the frame in one solution. I think the solution to which that's the target includes mix of the solution. Actually Turkey is doing good investment in renewable, etc. So it also from the other side needs to translate across. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim Bey. I have one other question.
That during this electrification and renewable energy
Geliyor mu sesim? Okay. So yeah, critical minerals are also very significant part of the discussions on energy transition. So yeah, part of the problem is that these minerals are concentrated in certain countries, a couple of countries, and the dominance of especially China, especially both for critical minerals and for renewable energy equipment, batteries and solar panels, etc. This is of course creating a new geopolitical sphere, let's say. So in the past, the power of the countries were defined by whether they have any fossil fuels within their countries. Now the power is, let's say, defined again in a different way. So today the power of the countries are measured more by their manufacturing capacity, their technology, whether they have the new technologies or not, whether they have the critical minerals, etc. So, of course, reaching to critical minerals in all countries, this will be important. So, for example, the European Union has its own critical minerals strategy. The US has its own mineral strategy. In terms of the countries that own critical minerals, they also have their own